The sky was a chaotic mess of gray and gloom. There was no rain, only the deafening roar of relentless thunder. High above the clouds, a massive web of lightning stretched for millions of miles, sealing off the heavens. Below me, a wall of absolute darkness descended into an endless abyss, standing lonely like the very edge of the world. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a wall. It was a pillar so massive it propped up the sky. Suddenly, the lightning went wild. A terrifying explosion shattered the clouds, and a figure tore through space, twisting the very fabric of reality. I watched as the figure slammed into that celestial pillar with a bone-shaking crash. Dust flew like mountain ranges, and boulders the size of moons tumbled into the dark void below. No one knew what lay down there, land, ocean, or the depths of hell itself. A man slowly stood up from the rubble embedded in the pillar. White light flickered across his skin, healing his wounds instantly. He held a pitch-black halberd wrapped in a long white silk ribbon that pulsed with the energy of creation, even as he radiated the breath of total destruction. His silver hair fell like a galaxy down his back, stars dying within the strands. This was I. He stepped into the void and vanished, returning to the battlefield in an instant. I. A voice boomed, echoing through the universe. You are a mere lowborn from the lower realms. It was luck enough that you set foot in the Holy Land. How dare you steal the seed of the 33 heavens? Do you plead guilty? The speaker sat upon a 36-petaled lotus, surrounded by 12 massive dragonfish. He was bathed in a blinding radiance that hid his face. This was the Luli Saint. I laughed, pointing his halberd at the lotus throne. Holy Land, don't make me laugh. You're just cowards clinging to the top of a broken pillar left behind by the greats of old. If you're so powerful, why don't you climb higher? See if you can actually find the true path to ascension. Meaningless talk, the saint replied coldly. Don't expect the Tao Palace or the Nine Heavens sect to save you. Why don't you guess where the Shapa Saint is right now? Tianya's expression darkened. He gripped his halberd, and the white ribbon detached, coiling around a small black sphere in his hand. You were too incompetent to find this seed, so now you try to steal it? My friends died for this. You think I'll just hand it over? With your talent, the saint tempted. Don't you want to collect all the seeds, rebuild the 33 heavens, and finally reach the true upper realm? I looked at him with pure disdain. You've never even tried to look up, have you? You have no idea what's at the peak of that pillar. Without another word, he hurled the glowing black sphere toward a pile of rubble where the bodies of his 4 companions lay. I can't bring you back, he whispered. But maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way back here and we can find the path together. A blinding light erupted. Meteors streaked across the sky, each capable of destroying stars. 4 of those streaks carried the bodies of his friends, flying toward parts unknown. Centuries passed, or maybe it was longer. I woke up with a scream, my head feeling like it was being split open by a hatchet. I was tossing and turning in what felt like a violent ocean. As my vision cleared, I realized I wasn't in water. I was lying on a meteor hurtling through space. Memories flooded in, messy and tangled. I remembered my life back on Earth. I was a nobody, a small-time thug who tried to do one good deed. I saw a girl jumping into a river to end it all, and I dived in to save her. I dragged her to the shore, exhausted, only for her to scream, "It's none of your business if I want to die." Then, she pushed me. My legs cramped. I fell back into the water, and that was it. The ultimate farmer and the snake story. But now, I was in a different body. A girl named Jiangyi. Her memories were a blur, bits of childhood, a blank space where her cultivation training should be, and then nothing until I woke up on this rock. There were even fragments of other people's lives, even non-humans, swirling in my head. Despite the chaos, my personality from Earth was the one in control. I looked down, and my heart nearly stopped. A massive blue planet filled my vision. If this meteor hit, I was dead. The impact happened with the sound of shattering porcelain. I couldn't move. I watched the sky turn from deep indigo to pale blue. Somehow, I wasn't dead. The energy of the meteor was protecting me, but we were still falling. Damn it, I cursed internally. I just left the underworld. Am I really going back for seconds already? Boom. The world exploded in sound and pain. I was thrown from the impact site. Just before I blacked out, I felt a scale on my body glow briefly before it shattered. The world would later call this the heavenly calamity. In Annan County, the mountains blocked the worst of the blast, but the villages were wiped out. Downstream, near a small medical clinic by the river, an old man in coarse robes opened his doors. He was a former imperial physician, exiled to this backwater. As the sun began to rise, he spotted something on the riverbank. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, covered in scars and filth. He rushed over and checked her pulse. She was alive. Without a word, he picked her up and carried her inside. That girl was me. I had survived, and though my body screamed in pain, I was grateful. The old man treated my wounds, thinking I was just another survivor of the calamity who had lost her family. Coincidentally, his last name was also Jiang. He didn't ask many questions, and I didn't have many answers. My new life was just beginning. I lived a quiet, retired life in that tiny village called G-Town. As my body healed, I started calling the old man Grandpa. The first time I said it, he flinched, his whole body trembling for a second. Then, he smiled and accepted me as his sudden granddaughter. The clinic was small, just a few rooms with a consultation area and medicine cabinets. We lived upstairs, tucked away under the wooden rafters. What surprised me most was that Grandpa rarely charged his patients. He only took a few copper coins when he made house calls. Most of the herbs in his cabinets were ones he climbed misty, jagged cliffs to pick himself. I didn't understand why a man who wasn't exactly poor worked so hard for nothing. Still, I helped him sort and grind the herbs. It wasn't just to pay him back for saving my life. When he stroked my hair and called me his granddaughter, I knew I finally had a home. The sound of the mortar in the morning and the steam from the medicine pot at night became my first real ties to this world. One morning, the sunlight filtered through the curtains as I polished the sandalwood shelves. I was meticulous, cleaning every crack. Grandpa stopped his work and watched me. My silhouette in the morning light seemed to remind him of someone from his past. "Grandpa," I said, turning around. My voice was calm, but my eyes were bright. "If we mix 3 parts loquat leaf into the mugwort, would the smoke help reduce coughing?" Grandpa's hand shook. A few months ago, I had pointed out the link between swamp miasma and mosquitoes. Now, I was suggesting improvements to his treatments. My suggestions actually lined up with the secret logic of ancient medical texts. He stood there speechless, looking at the drying herbs. I think he was remembering his time at the Imperial Academy 20 years ago, and how his colleagues had laughed at the very theories I was now proving right. Over the next few months, I figured out where I was. This land was the Dahong Empire, the dominant power on the Yuhing continent. I was in Annan County, specifically Ji-Town. It was a wild, backwater border region near a fortress called Jianan Pass. To the northeast lay the 9 Dragon Mountains, a massive range shaped like a dragon's tail. That was the territory of the monster tribes. To the southeast were the Black Soil Plains, a vast maze of conflicting powers known as the Labyrinth Lands. Ji-Town had its own history. Legend says a celestial being named Ji once lived here and taught the villagers how to weave. Others say the name comes from the red mulberry trees and the silkworms that eat them. Their silk is rare and tough, used to line military armor. Because of this, our little town had a duty to supply the army. What really shocked me was a book kept in the local ancestral hall called the Ji Jing. It ranked every fabric and thread in the world. Since Grandpa was respected in town, I got to attend the ceremonies and see it. In this world, martial arts were everything. Women could become masters and generals, so nobody minded me looking at the records. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I read it. Our famous red mulberry silk was only ranked 96th. The items at the top of the list sounded like fairy tales I'd read in my past life. They were wild, contradictory, and completely unbelievable. Most locals treated it like a picture book for kids. However, I noticed something interesting in the descriptions of the lower-ranked items. The way the book classified silkworms matched the cultivation knowledge I remembered from my previous life as Jiang Lian. I spent months piecing together my predecessor's broken memories. I learned how to look inward at my spirit platform. But when I checked mine, my heart sank. My dantian, my energy center, was shattered. It wasn't just cracked, it was like fine powder. In this world, the path to power starts at the chi gathering stage, where you move energy through your body. After that comes the 100 refinements stage to build a sea of energy. My foundation was still there, but with a shattered dantian, I was stuck at the very beginning. I could move a little air, but I'd never be a master. Grandpa knew. He was an experienced healer, and he'd seen how badly I was hurt. To him, the fact that I could even walk was a miracle. He didn't expect me to ever reach a higher level. But I didn't give up. I secretly watched the town warriors, learning their breathing patterns. I practiced in private, pushing my breath through my broken veins. I managed to complete a small cycle of energy. If I could finish a great cycle, I would officially reach the chi gathering stage. One morning, Grandpa and I were walking by the river. He turned to look at me. For the last 6 months, he had refused to let me go herb picking on the mountain, no matter how much I begged. "Come with me today," he said suddenly. "While my bones are still strong, it's time I taught you a few things." Grandpa went back into the clinic and gathered his things. He grabbed his medicine tray and his favorite wicker basket, moving with a quiet purpose. I didn't ask any questions. I just followed him out, keeping pace with his steady, rhythmic stride. He looked sturdy enough, but as I watched him from behind, I noticed the truth. He was getting old. Over the last 6 months, he had smiled more because of me, but the wrinkles on his face had deepened. The white hair at his temples seemed more prominent than ever. We headed toward the mountains surrounding our town. Most were small, barely 100 feet high, though the main peak, Mount Seun, reached nearly 1,000. These peaks weren't famous. Local fishermen didn't even bother naming them on their maps. The soil was too acidic for crops, but it was perfect for red mulberry trees. We hiked through thickets of pines and the occasional bamboo grove. There were no legendary spirit herbs here, but the mountains were full of common plants used for fevers and bruises. Grandpa moved through the terrain like a mountain goat. I was shocked by how fast he was. I had to circulate my inner breath constantly just to keep him in sight. I realized then that he was setting the pace on purpose. He wanted me to practice my breathing while moving. He was forcing me to turn energy circulation into a survival instinct. We stopped in front of a jagged cliff. Grandpa looked up at the high rock face and turned to me. "How are you feeling, Jiang?" "I'm not tired at all," I replied, catching my breath. He nodded and pointed toward the cliffside. "Good. Look up there." High on the rock wall grew several stalks of huangbai. It's a vital herb for treating toxic rashes, but it's incredibly dangerous to harvest. One slip meant death. I looked at the height, then at Grandpa, wondering how an old man intended to reach them. Grandpa just smiled. He looked genuinely happy, a far cry from the somber man I first met. He pulled out a small metal ring attached to a long thread of red mulberry silk. He threw the ring high into the air. At first, it looked like a total miss. The ring sailed wide of the herbs. But then, Grandpa flicked his fingers. The silk thread danced. The ring suddenly jerked sideways in midair, defying every law of physics I knew. It swept across the cliff and neatly harvested the huangbai. I stood there stunned. Then it clicked. I remembered reading about red mulberry silk in the classic of weaving. It has incredible energy conductivity. That's why the military uses it for armor. It allows soldiers to channel their chi into their gear. Grandpa was using the silk as an extension of his own body. He was controlling the thread with his inner breath. This was a high-level technique. Before he was a village healer, he had been a physician in the imperial palace. This precision was his life's work. He was passing it all to me. He knew my dantian was shattered and that I might never reach the higher stages of power, but he didn't care. He wanted me to have his skills. For the next 6 months, we went into the mountains every 2 weeks. He taught me how to survive in the wild, how to identify herbs, and how to manipulate the silk thread. I practiced constantly. Even during breaks, I'd tie a stick to a piece of silk and try to make it move with my breath. By the time autumn arrived, I had achieved the impossible. Through sheer repetition and Grandpa's guidance, I managed to push my energy through a great cycle. It took me 3 times longer than a normal person, but I had finally reached the chi gathering stage. But as the leaves turned red, Grandpa withered. He fell ill and couldn't leave his bed. It started when a letter arrived from the capital, sent by an old friend. I read the letter and finally understood the shadow that hung over him. Years ago, Grandpa had been exiled from the palace because an important lady died under his care. Now, his friend informed him that the court had officially banned all of his medical theories and books. His life's work was being erased. Even though he was bedridden, he didn't seem bitter. He spent his days watching me and smiling. I knew the truth, though. I couldn't learn a lifetime of medicine in just 1 year. And no matter how hard I practiced, his techniques couldn't fix my broken dantian. I was still a hollow vessel. Still, I didn't stop. I took over the clinic, treating the townspeople for their simple aches and pains. I wasn't a genius, but after a year of watching Grandpa, I knew enough to get by. I kept practicing his silk techniques every night, waiting and wondering what the future held for a girl with a shattered foundation. Late autumn arrived, and the air turned crisp. One morning, while I was practicing my breathing exercises, I noticed something strange. I looked inward, focusing my mind on my shattered dantian. At first glance, the ruins of my spiritual foundation looked the same, just a pile of useless dust. But as I looked closer, weaving through the thin strands of my chi, I saw it. Faint, wispy trails of black mist were swirling in the wreckage. I was stunned. Over the past month, I had noticed that my ability to comprehend medical theories and techniques had become incredibly fast. My internal energy hadn't grown at all, and even though my control over the silk threads was better, it didn't explain this sudden mental clarity. I kept my breath steady and focused harder on that black mist. What was this? My predecessor's spiritual foundation was supposed to be completely destroyed. The path to immortality was supposed to be closed to me forever. Yet, this black fog felt powerful, far stronger than the normal chi I was laboring to produce. It was this mist that was supercharging my brain, allowing me to understand complex ideas in seconds. The only problem was that there was so little of it. It only lasted for a few moments before vanishing. When I tried to use it to solve a problem, the answers came to me as easily as breathing. I spent the next 2 weeks observing myself. I realized that every time I practiced my breathing, a tiny amount of this black energy would be generated, but it always stopped at a certain point. Finally, after days of intense internal focus, I found the source. Deep within the ruins of my dantian, there was a tiny, black seed. It was no bigger than a grain of rice. It didn't stay still. It flickered and jumped around the wreckage like a ghost, making it almost impossible to track. A demon seed, I whispered. I didn't even know where the words came from. They just felt right. As autumn deepened into winter, the world followed the cycle of decay. My grandfather, Old Man Jiang, was finally able to get out of bed. He was frail and had to lean heavily on a wooden cane, but he was stubborn. He spent his days nagging me about the clinic. "Is the work too hard for you, girl?" he'd ask. "Oh, and don't forget the old woman at the south end of the village. Her asthma acts up this time of year. Go check on her." I'd help him walk through the clinic, listening to his constant chatter. "I know, Grandpa. I saw Mrs. Zhang yesterday. She's doing fine." I was running the clinic entirely on my own now. Grandpa didn't look at me with pity anymore. It was as if he had finally let go of his obsession with fixing my broken foundation. I never told him about the black mist or the seed. I could feel his life force fading day by day. He was over 80 years old, and the combination of his exile and the news from the capital had broken his spirit. He was my only family in this world, and even though I had promised myself I wouldn't get emotionally attached after my past life ended so abruptly, I couldn't help but care for him. One morning, Grandpa stood by the river, staring at the water. "I wonder what year it is in the palaces of the immortals," he muttered. "The great river flows east, washing away everything in its path." "Grandpa, can you speak normally? I don't understand you," I said, playing the role of the confused granddaughter. He laughed, leaning on his cane. "It's just an old man's rambling. It's better that you don't understand. Don't try to swim against the current." Spring arrived, and Grandpa seemed to regain some of his old energy. He didn't practice medicine anymore, but he agreed to walk into town with me to buy supplies. "Dr. Jiang, Miss Jiang, Happy New Year." The people of the town greeted us warmly. We were the only doctors around, and since we often treated people for free, everyone respected us. "Happy New Year." Grandpa barked at a young man with a grin. "The Lantern Festival passed ages ago," and stopped staring at my granddaughter. "Come by in a few days to get your mother's medicine. She needs it." The young man laughed and thanked him. I knew they weren't actually interested in me. I was 13, maybe 14, and I looked plain, definitely not the kind of beauty that turned heads in a small town. They were just being kind. We reached the market and finished our shopping. As we were about to head back, a young man dressed in Taoist robes approached us. He looked sleepy and lazy, but he bowed respectfully. His name was Yuan-Ming. He had arrived in town last year, setting up a stall to sell lucky charms and tell fortunes. To me, he was a total fraud, selling nothing but psychological comfort. But since he hadn't scammed us, I didn't mind him. Dr. Jiang, Yuan-Ming said, I have a favor to ask. I've been asked to find a doctor for a house call. Grandpa leaned on his cane. I don't see patients anymore. Talk to the girl. Grandpa wasn't worried about me. This region was peaceful, no bandits, no wild beasts. And even though my foundation was broken, I was still a martial artist at the 10th level of the body refining stage. I could handle myself. I looked at Yuan-Ming. You know the rules, Taoist. We don't charge for visits at the clinic, but if I have to travel, there's a fee. Of course, Yuan-Ming said, bowing to me as if I were a grown professional. The request comes from the wife of landlord Chui at Emerald Bamboo Manor. She wants you to check on the old master. I'll be going as well to perform a ritual. A ritual? I asked, suspicious. He nodded. You haven't heard? At the start of the new year, landlord Chui fell ill with a strange, sudden sickness. I shook my head. That's strange. If it was an emergency, they should have sent someone to the clinic weeks ago. We haven't heard a word from the manor. My professional attitude seemed to please Grandpa. He nodded in approval. That was how things were supposed to be done. Yuan-Ming invited us to sit at a roadside tea house. He finally explained the situation. Apparently, landlord Chui's eldest daughter was convinced her father had been possessed by an evil spirit. That was why they hadn't called for a doctor. They had been trying to solve it with charms and prayers for half a month. Nothing had worked. Yuan-Ming told us he had been wandering near Emerald Bamboo Manor when the landlord's wife approached him in a panic. She begged him for a solution. He poured us both a cup of tea as he continued his story. He told her that while he was a man of the Tao, they couldn't just blame everything on ghosts and demons. He suggested that perhaps the landlord was just suffering from a severe illness. Grandpa took a slow sip of his tea. He looked Yuan-Ming dead in the eye. It sounds to me like you want my girl to go there just to clean up your mess. Yuan-Ming jumped, waving his hands in denial. But after a few seconds of Grandpa's staring, he slumped. Well, he muttered, if my rituals don't work, we can't just let the man die, can we? I rolled my eyes. This Taoist certainly knew how to hedge his bets. Still, I thought about it for a moment. Fine, I said. You do your ritual, I'll do my job. But the consultation fee must be paid in full. No discounts. For me, it was simple. Whatever Yuan-Ming was up to was his business. I was there to treat a patient. If landlord Chui really was sick, Grandpa's ethics wouldn't let me just walk away. Of course, no problem at all, Yuan-Ming said. He stood up and bowed. I'll head to the manor now to make the arrangements. Shall we say tomorrow at noon? I nodded. He bowed again and disappeared into the crowd. The next day, I finished my morning duties at the clinic. When the time felt right, I packed my medical kit and headed out of town. Emerald Bamboo Manor was about 2 miles away. It wasn't a long walk, but the manor sat on high ground, so the road wound around the hills. The Chui family had made their fortune in silk. Behind the manor, 2 entire hills were covered in red mulberry trees, feeding a massive silk production factory. As I approached, I saw a small, thick bamboo forest surrounding the main gates. That was where the manor got its name. I saw Yuan-Ming standing by the entrance, waiting for me. I was about to wave when a strange sensation washed over me. Inside my broken spiritual foundation, that faint, mysterious black thread suddenly began to tremble. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the manor gates, my muscles tensing. What was going on? Yuan-Ming noticed my change in expression. He dropped his lazy act and hurried toward me. Miss Jiang, he said, his voice low. It looks like my ritual is more necessary than I thought. Here, I have 3 spiritual tools. I want to give one to you. Pick whichever one you feel a connection to. He reached into a small pouch at his waist and pulled out 3 items. The first was an old calligraphy brush. The wood was worn smooth, and the bristles were frayed and splitting. It looked like it had been used 1,000 times too many. The second was a small wooden sword. It was in even worse shape. The wood was gray and cracking, looking like it would snap if I even breathed on it too hard. The third item was a string of black Buddhist beads. The cord holding them together looked thin and brittle. I gave Yuanming a long, flat look. "You're a Taoist priest," I said. "Why are you carrying Buddhist beads?" Despite the absurdity, I didn't complain. I reached out and took the beads, sliding them onto my wrist. "Why the sudden gifts, Taoist?" I asked. "Is there really something unclean inside?" Yuanming watched me put on the beads, then stuffed the other 2 items back into a tiny pouch hanging from his belt. His entire demeanor changed. The humble priest was gone. "It's not necessarily something unclean," he said, sounding strangely arrogant. "And even if it is, this master will handle it personally." This master? Yesterday he was calling himself a humble priest, and today he was acting like a high-powered immortal. He felt more like a con artist than ever. He saw me staring at him and gave a sheepish laugh. "Don't worry about it. Just keep the beads. They have a destiny with you. They'll be useful once we get inside." I didn't look at his face. I was staring at the small pouch on his belt. It was only the size of a man's palm. The wooden sword and the brush were both much longer than the bag, yet he had slid them inside easily. The bag didn't even bulge. "What is that?" I asked, pointing at the pouch. "That sword was twice as long as that bag." "This?" Yuanming patted the pouch proudly. "This is a storage bag. It's a tool made by master geomancers. It contains a small pocket of space inside. They're quite expensive for ordinary people." "A storage bag." I went quiet. Back on Earth, I had read about things like this in web novels. I never thought I'd actually see one. This world was becoming much more complicated than I initially thought. I wasn't surprised that storage items existed in this world. I was surprised that they were actually manufactured right here, inside Emerald Bamboo Manor. I remembered a tiny detail mentioned in the scriptures I had studied. Red mulberry silk was one of the top 100 materials in the world for a single reason. It could be woven into universe bags. The pouch on the priest's belt was a far cry from a legendary universe bag, but it used the same spatial principles. Once I realized this, everything started to click. Yuanming stepped forward and knocked on the massive manor gates. A moment later, I heard the heavy wooden bolt sliding back. The doors creaked open, revealing a young woman flanked by 2 servants. She looked to be about 20, dressed in an elegant green bamboo-patterned skirt. Her jet-black hair reached all the way to her waist. She carried herself with the poise of a high-born lady. "Is it Taoist you?" she asked. Her face was heavy with worry, but it brightened slightly when she saw him. "Greetings, Mistress Ingwe." "It is indeed I," Yuanming replied. He instantly reverted to his polite, humble persona from the day before, giving her a standard bow. He gestured toward me. "This is Jiang Yi from the Wuk Clinic. She has come at Madame Chui's request to help with the diagnosis." Cui Ingwe glanced at me and frowned. I noticed the look but didn't take offense. I simply offered a respectful bow. This had to be the landlord's only daughter. "I told you, Taoist, my father has been possessed," she said, her voice flat. "You confirmed it yourself when you were here last. My mother thinks it's just a sudden illness, but she doesn't understand the reality of the situation." "Mistress, please be at ease," Yuanming said, waving a hand. "I have my reasons for bringing Jiang Yi. Let's head inside first. It will calm your mother's heart and allow Jiang Yi to see the situation for herself." Cui Ingwe didn't argue. She nodded and led us toward the main building of the estate. As we walked, I watched her closely. Unlike the priest, who walked like a normal person, her steps were incredibly steady and controlled. She was clearly a powerful stage 10 martial artist. Then I saw it. A small, vermilion plaque hung from her waist, about the size of 2 fingers. The character for green was carved into it. She caught me looking and offered a faint, elegant smile. "I've heard much about you, Jiang Yi, the 13-year-old successor to Old Man Jiang. Your reputation precedes you. I took the opportunity to test a theory. You flatter me. I've heard there is someone in Emerald Bamboo Manor capable of crafting storage bags. Would that person happen to be you, Mistress Ingwe?" Her eyebrows shot up. She was clearly impressed. We were in a remote town where very few people should have recognized her rank as a geomancer, yet I had called it out instantly. She led us into the main hall and gestured for us to sit, while servants brought tea. You guessed correctly, she admitted, taking the high seat. I am indeed a geomancer. Since you're interested, I'll make you a deal. If you can help my father recover, I will personally gift you a newly crafted storage bag. I blinked. That was a massive promise. I thought about it for a few seconds, then slowly shook my head. I appreciate the offer, mistress, but a storage bag is too valuable. It requires high-grade red mulberry silk and the specialized skills of a geomancer. Growing up in this town, I know exactly how much those materials cost. It's too much. I paused, meeting her eyes. However, I am very interested in how one becomes a geomancer. If you could tell me about that, I would consider it payment enough. Chui Ingwe laughed softly. You're a strange one. Red mulberry silk is one of the 5 great materials of our empire, and my manor is famous for producing the highest quality. Since we grow it ourselves, the cost doesn't matter to me. And as for becoming a geomancer, you're already a stage 10 martial artist. You've already met the first requirement. If this works out, I'll tell you everything. Before I could thank her, a group of servants emerged from the back of the hall. A middle-aged woman with a face full of grief followed them. When she saw the priest, she looked like she had seen a savior. Oh, Taoist you've finally come. This was Madame Chui. Unlike her daughter, she didn't believe in demons or possessions. This town had been peaceful for 100 years. She couldn't wrap her head around something supernatural happening to her husband. But she couldn't win against her daughter's iron will. Chui Ingwe was the one who really ran this manor now. Madame Chui stopped and looked at me, her eyes filled with doubt. And this little girl? Is she supposed to help? I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was thinking the same thing. Can I actually do this? Based on their conversation, this wasn't a medical problem. This was something much darker. Just listening to the strange symptoms was enough. I knew right away that this wasn't something I could solve with only a year of medical training. I was out of my league. My plan was simple. Take a quick look, realize I was useless, and then head back to get my grandfather. He was the real expert. A soft cough interrupted the conversation in the living room. Chui Ingwe led her grieving mother aside, signaling for me and Yu Wenming to head to the attic bedroom to check on her father. We followed the servants across the courtyard toward a small, detached building. As we walked, Chui Ingwe leaned closer to the priest. Her voice was low, laced with a trace of respect. Taoist, I'm curious. You agree that my father is being troubled by a ghost, yet you told my mother it was a sudden illness. And instead of bringing Dr. Jiang, you brought this young girl. Why? Yu Wenming still looked like he had just woken up from a nap. He remained calm, his voice steady. I know what you're worried about, eldest Mississippi. But since she is here, your father's situation will be resolved 100%. You can rest easy. I never lie. Doubt still flickered in Chui Ingwe's eyes, but she didn't argue. She knew this priest wasn't as simple as he looked. As a geomancer who had studied in the imperial capital, she had seen true immortals before. She knew these high-level masters had a terrifying ability to see through the mundane world. Just a few days ago, Yu Wenming had identified the exact nature of the entity haunting her father with a single sentence. What confused her most was why I, a seemingly ordinary girl named Jiang, was the key to solving this. It was the reason she had offered a storage treasure as a reward. She wanted to see what I was capable of. The fact that the priest hadn't objected to her offer meant he valued my potential even more than she realized. We reached the attic. The room was spotless, clearly well-maintained by the servants. On the bed, a middle-aged man lay still. His eyes were closed, his brow furrowed in a permanent wince. His fists were clenched tight, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like a man who had been tortured by pain for a very long time. Miss Jiang, why don't you go up and check Landlord Chui's pulse? Yu Wenming said suddenly, a small smile playing on his lips. I caught his eye and shot him a sharp glare. This isn't something I can fix. I scratched my head, feeling helpless, but I walked to the bedside anyway. Even if I couldn't solve it, I wasn't going to be lazy. I expected the black energy in my soul to tremble again, just like it had at the manor gates. But this time, there was nothing. I leaned in and checked everything. I smelled his hair, peeled back his eyelids to check his pupils, and unbuttoned his collar to inspect his skin and muscles. I felt the pulse in his neck and his wrist. The results were chilling. His pupils were dilated, similar to a dead man's. The veins under his skin were bulging unnaturally, and his pulse was nothing like a normal person in a coma. My head started to ache. This was definitely beyond me. I sighed and turned toward Cui Yingwe, ready to apologize and tell her I needed to call my grandfather. But just as I opened my mouth, the black energy inside my broken spiritual foundation jerked violently. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around to look at landlord Cui, but everything looked the same. Nothing had moved. Yu Wenming remained sleepy-eyed, but I noticed Cui Yingwe's hand had dropped. A crystal-like object hung from a silk thread in her fingers, vibrating slightly. She had noticed my reaction. "What's wrong? Miss Jiang, how is my husband?" Madame Cui asked, her face pale with worry. I looked at the mother, then at the indifferent priest. I stayed silent for a few breaths, trying to settle my nerves. "Madam, perhaps it's best if Taoist you performs a ritual first. I'll examine the landlord again after he's finished." Madame Cui sensed the tension. Her anxiety was peaking. "It's okay, mother," Cui Yingwe said, stepping in to comfort her. "Let the Taoist set up his altar. We'll let Miss Jiang check on father afterward." "Yes," Yu Wenming added. "Madame Cui, why don't you go back to your room and rest? We will notify you as soon as the ritual is complete." He signaled for the servants to lead her away. Once she was gone, he started giving orders. An altar made of sandalwood, an incense burner, and various ritual tools were brought to the attic. I had suspected Yu Wenming knew more than he was letting on, but that sudden jolt of energy in my soul made me realize how dangerous this really was. I wanted to ask him what was happening, but I couldn't exactly explain the black mist hiding inside me. Cui Yingwe walked over to me while the priest worked. She looked at me with genuine curiosity. She couldn't understand how a complete outsider like me, someone without any magical tools, could sense that momentary flicker of darkness. "I don't know how you did it, but you felt that just now, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "It was like a ripple on a calm lake," she said softly. "Do you know what that thing is? We call the 4 directions of space Yu. But beyond those directions, there are different depths to reality." She began to explain things I had never heard of. In my world, space was just space, but she spoke of it as something with layers. She told me about the 5 great arts: geomancy, exorcism, alchemy, chi mastery, and talisman crafting. She was a geomancer, a practitioner of the path of Yu. Her eyes shone as she explained that the world we live in is just one specific depth, formed when spiritual energy fills the void. "You mean our world is just a layer of something deeper?" I asked, fascinated. "According to our theories, yes. If you ever become a geomancer, you'll learn the system properly." She reached into her robe and pulled out a storage bag, holding it in front of me. "At different depths, the conditions for creating space aren't always the same. Even at the same depth, little pockets of reality can exist like bubbles in water. These bubbles don't blend with our world, they stay separate. Anchoring those drifting spaces is the secret to making a storage bag." I stared at the bag in Cui Yingwe's hand, processing her words. After a long silence, the pieces started to click. "What does any of this have to do with your father?" I asked. She tucked the bag away and looked toward the small attic where landlord Cui was resting. "That's exactly why I know he's possessed," she said. "The ghost haunting him is hiding in one of those tiny, independent spaces. It's anchored to my father, but it drifts around him. I'm not strong enough to find it. I can only catch a glimpse of it through my tools when it passes through a different depth of reality." She sighed, her shoulders dropping. "I don't even know what that thing is. At this point, only priest Yu Wenming has the power to drag it out." We both turned to look at the priest. He was currently in the middle of a ritual, and it looked like a total disaster. He was flailing a wooden sword around like a madman, chanting nonsense that didn't sound like any spell I'd ever heard. Cui Yingwe's lip twitched. I just rolled my eyes. Was this guy a genius or a fraud? We were standing right in front of the victim's family, and he was acting like a street performer. Finally, as if he'd grown bored of the act, Yu Wenming tossed the wooden sword onto the table. "Enough of that," he muttered. "I'm really not cut out for this theatrical stuff." He beckoned me over. I didn't have much of a choice. I'd let him talk me into this mess, so I sucked it up and walked toward the altar, praying he actually knew what he was doing. "Look, priest," I whispered. "You better have a real plan. I'm just a doctor. If this goes south, I'm out of here." Yu Wenming just smiled, looking perfectly calm. He reached into his storage bag and pulled out a brilliant golden talisman. The writing on it was so fluid it looked like it was crawling. A single character that looked like the word destroy. Without a single word of a chant, he rubbed his fingers together, sparked a flame out of thin air, and lit the paper. He dropped the burning talisman into a bowl of clear water. The flame didn't go out. Instead, the red ink from the talisman detached from the ash and began swimming through the water like a tiny red dragon. I could have sworn I heard a faint roar echoing from the bowl. "Take this water into the room," Yu Wenming said, handing me the bowl. "Splash it on Landlord Shui." I stared at the swirling red ink. "Why me? Why can't you do it?" "I have to stay here to maintain the altar," he lied smoothly. "Don't worry. You'll be fine." I looked at the water again. Something about it felt powerful, almost reassuring. I took a deep breath, turned around, and headed into the attic. "One more thing," Yu Wenming called out just as I reached the door. "The second you splash that water, don't hesitate. Run out immediately." My face cramped up. I was just a young girl in this world. Why was I the one doing the dangerous work? But I knew he was a powerful cultivator. A man like that didn't need to trick a commoner like me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me. "Don't be afraid." Yu Wenming's voice rang out directly inside my head. "Just follow my lead. If you finish this, it will be a great opportunity for you." The sudden telepathy made me jump, but it calmed my nerves a little. As for the opportunity, I didn't care about luck or treasures. I just wanted to get out of here alive. I walked to Landlord Shui's bedside, holding the bowl steady. The black mist inside my broken soul was quiet for now. I didn't wait. I raised the bowl and threw the water directly onto him. The second the water hit his skin, a blood-curdling shriek ripped through the air. It didn't come from his mouth, it came from everywhere. Inside me, the black threads of energy went wild, thrashing as if they were trying to escape my body. My skin crawled. On the bed, a terrifying figure began to crawl out of thin air. "You meddling priest. You crazy woman." The ghost roared in a voice that sounded like it crawled out of a grave. "A world-extinguishing talisman? You used a tool meant to destroy entire storage dimensions just to deal with me? I'll kill you. I'll tear you apart." I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I bolted for the door. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. I even kicked it, but it was sealed tight by some invisible force. I spun around. The shadowy figure was staring right at me, its eyes burning with pure hatred. "Little girl," it hissed. "I'm going to tear your limbs off. I want you to watch while I eat your flesh and organs. You and that priest are both dead." The ghost lunged at me. "The beads," Yu Wenming's voice shouted in my mind. "Hold the beads I gave you toward him." I didn't think. I reached for the black Buddhist beads around my wrist. I didn't hesitate. I ripped the Buddhist beads from my right wrist and held them high toward the ghostly figure. Before they even touched the spirit, the string snapped. 8 of the beads scattered across the floor with a hollow clatter, but one remained. It hung suspended in midair, defying gravity. A strange, indescribable black light erupted from that single bead. It was silent, yet powerful. The terrifying ghost let out a gasp and was forced back by the dark radiance. "How is this possible?" the ghost hissed, staring at the bead in shock. It turned its gaze toward me, the same girl it had just threatened to devour. Its eyes flickered with a weird realization. "You little girl, you practice demonic arts too." I didn't understand a word it said. To me, the creature was just a twisted, ugly mass of smoke and malice. It was so powerful I felt like an ant beneath its feet. Any sound coming from its mouth just sounded like the wailing of 1,000 wolves. The bead continued to pulse with that dark light. The ghost, whose body was half crumbled and ragged, seemed to regain a bit of its sanity. Its blood-red eyes scanned me through the thick mist. "Heh, you actually have a demon seed inside you," it muttered. "If I had known there was such a perfect vessel here, I wouldn't have wasted my time trying to possess a useless mortal like Landlord Shui." The ghost glanced at the door. It seemed to be looking right through the wood at the priest standing outside. It finally realized why its previous probes into the room had found nothing. That priest must have been using a powerful treasure to shield me. The ghost had been hiding inside a tiny pocket dimension it had refined over 1,000 years. It couldn't see the outside world clearly until that world-extinguishing talisman blew its hiding spot to pieces. If it hadn't spent centuries as a ghost cultivator, that blast would have erased it instantly. It knew the priest outside was dangerous, but likely lacked the strength to face it head-on. That's why the priest stayed outside and used a talisman to do the dirty work. As for me, I looked like a weak mortal. The ghost concluded that the only reason I had a demon seed was because of that floating bead. It decided right then that the bead was the treasure it had been searching for all along. I was pinned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was sealed tight. There was no way out. "Priest, Yu Wenming, help me," I screamed in my head. I wanted to cry, but I was too terrified to even make a sound. There was no response. I couldn't hear anything from the hallway. My legs gave out, and I slid down the door, trembling so hard I couldn't stand. "Don't waste your breath," the ghost rasped, its voice sounding like grinding stones. "I've isolated this space. No message is getting out." My heart sank. I was trapped. I had trusted the wrong person, and now I was going to die again. I swore to myself that if I ever got another life, I would never be kind or trust anyone ever again. "Don't worry," the ghost sneered. "Once I refine this bead, I'll take your body. Your soul will vanish instantly. You won't feel a thing." The black mist around the ghost exploded. Dozens of stone-like black tentacles reached out, slithering toward the floating bead. The only sound in the room was the ghost's greedy, heavy breathing. The moment a tentacle touched the bead's light, the radiance vanished. Then, the bead turned into a vacuum. A terrifying suction force pulled at the ghost, trying to drag its essence inside. The ghost didn't panic. It actually laughed. "I knew you'd try that. You want to absorb my demonic energy? Try it." The tentacles instantly crystallized, turning into a hard, glass-like substance. The bead's suction hit a wall. It couldn't pull any more mist out. Instead, the crystallized tentacles began to drain the energy from the bead. I thought it was over. The ghost thought it was over. But behind the creature, a silent crack appeared in space. A deep blue talisman drifted out of the rift. The red ink on the paper glowed with a single word: lock. Thick blue chains erupted from the talisman. They slammed into the ghost's back, skewering its chest. Smaller chains followed, weaving through its limbs and pinning it in place. The ghost's triumph turned to pure horror. A world-extinguishing talisman followed by a heaven-locking talisman. What kind of lunatic is that priest? It roared in frustration, but it was useless. The crystallized tentacles shattered into dust. With the ghost pinned and its energy out of control, the bead's suction power skyrocketed. In less than 3 seconds, the ghost was sucked dry. Its body vanished, its soul extinguished forever. The blue chains retreated back into the talisman, and the paper burst into a calm, green flame. In the blink of an eye, the ghost was gone. Not even ash remained. It was as if the creature had never existed at all. The black bead, which had just swallowed a powerful spirit, stopped glowing. It turned back into a plain, unpolished wooden ball and floated gently down toward me. I stood there, completely stunned. My mind was still reeling from the shock of the battle. I reached out instinctively and caught the falling bead. The moment my fingers touched it, a surge of energy rushed into my body. It was faint, but I recognized the sensation immediately. It felt exactly like the wisps of black chi residing in my dantian. This energy flowed through my veins, and I felt a sudden jolt in my cultivation. My internal breath, which had been stuck ever since I reached the 10th stage, actually grew. I had made progress. "Save?" I started to shout, but the word died in my throat. The ghost was already gone. "He's dead," a voice said. I jumped. Yu Wenming, the priest in the gray robes, was standing in the corner of the room. I hadn't even heard him move. He coughed awkwardly, his attempt at a grand, mysterious entrance ruined by my sudden outburst. "That spirit was filled with malice," he explained, clearing his throat. "What entered your body was the pure, refined essence left over after the bead purified it. As for the rest of the ghost's energy, I'll have a use for that later." I didn't care about his explanation. I just stared at him, my eyes wide. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask why he had used me as bait and why he had put my life on the line. Yu Wenming looked uncomfortable under my glare. He knew he had played me dirty, and he looked like he wanted to bolt. He rubbed his chin, looking at me as if he were considering giving me some profound advice. After all, he was a real master. I just shook my head and stayed silent. The shock was fading, but the lingering fear of death still gripped my heart. I had died once before in my previous life, so I knew how precious living was. But I also knew better than to question a man like him. The battle I just witnessed was far beyond anything a mortal could understand. Asking too many questions would only lead to more danger. Yu Wenming sighed when he realized I wasn't going to speak. He turned his attention to landlord Chui, who was still unconscious on the bed. With a casual wave of his hand, a gentle breeze swept through the room. Chui's beard fluttered, and his pale, sickly face suddenly flushed with color. The bulging, blackened veins on his neck and hands began to recede. "Once I leave, you can wake him up," Yu Wenming said, turning toward the door. He paused and looked back at me. "You have a destiny with that bead. Keep it safe. If you ever find a way to leave these mortal lands, try to find the other 8. 9 beads in total." I looked down at the single black sphere in my palm. I wasn't thinking about how powerful a set of 9 would be. I was thinking about how this one tiny object had erased a terrifying demon in 3 seconds. Was carrying something this powerful a blessing or a curse? By the time I looked up, Yu Wenming was gone. The room was empty. I sighed, leaning against the wall for support until my legs stopped shaking. I walked over to the spot where the string had snapped and picked up the other 8 ordinary beads one by one. Finally, I walked to the bed and tended to landlord Chui. A few minutes later, I pushed open the attic doors. Chui Yingyue was waiting outside, pacing back and forth. She rushed toward me the moment she saw me. "Miss Jiang, how is my father?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, a familiar cough echoed from inside the room. "Father!" Yingyue cried out. Her face lit up with pure joy. She immediately barked orders at the servants to fetch her mother. "Landlord Chui's blood flow was merely obstructed," I said calmly. "He fainted from a sudden surge of internal heat. After 2 days of rest, he'll be fine." I didn't mention the ghost. I didn't mention Yu Wenming. These were things ordinary people weren't meant to know. The problem was solved, the man was alive, and it was better to keep the supernatural horrors a secret. "Miss Jiang, your medical skills are truly miraculous," Yingyue said, bowing deeply to me. "Thank you. You flatter me, Miss Yingyue," I replied. "But really, we should thank Taoist Yu Wenming." "Taoist Yu Wenming?" She looked at me, completely confused. "Who is that?" I froze. I looked up at the sky, then toward the courtyard where the priest had set up his altar. It was gone. The table, the incense, even the ash from the burnt spirit paper had vanished. There wasn't a single trace left. "Oh, the priest who came with me this morning," I stammered, trying to make sense of it. "He was very skilled. He diagnosed your father's condition before we even arrived." "Oh, you mean that young monk who arrived with you?" Yingyue nodded as if she suddenly remembered. "I saw him walking away just as I opened the door. I didn't realize he was a master." My blood ran cold. Yu Wenming hadn't just cleaned up the courtyard. He had altered the memories of everyone involved. Later that evening, after landlord Chui's wife arrived and confirmed her husband was recovering, I prepared to head back to the clinic. I had my payment in hand, but as I reached the gate, Yingyue caught up to me. "Miss Jiang, wait. I promised you a storage bag if you cured my father." "I haven't forgotten." I had almost forgotten myself. Yingyue was a certified geographer, a master of spiritual tools. She had the skill to create spatial artifacts. "I have plenty of high-quality red mulberry silk in stock," she continued. "Please give me half a month. Once it's finished, I'll have it delivered to your clinic. Is that all right?" I nodded quickly. A storage bag was a treasure I couldn't refuse. But I couldn't help but wonder if Yu Wenming was pulling strings behind the scenes again. "Also," Yingyue said with a smile, "you mentioned you were interested in the path of a geographer. In 2 weeks, I'll send a letter of recommendation along with the bag." My lingering resentment toward the priest vanished instantly. This was a massive opportunity. I bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Miss Yingyue. But how does one actually become a geographer?" "Every autumn, the county city holds an entrance exam for the geography hall," she explained. "With my recommendation, you can skip the written exams and go straight into the academy. Whether you can graduate and become a true geographer depends entirely on your own talent, Miss Jiang." Chui Ingyue spoke with total sincerity. I didn't understand why she was so supportive of a 13-year-old girl like me, but she was a woman of her word. I thanked her again, turned on my heel, and left. I followed the small path through the bamboo forest back toward the medical clinic. The sun was setting, and a deep twilight began to swallow the land. High above the clouds, a young man in a gray-white robe drifted lazily through the sky. He had his hands behind his back, stepping on the mist as if it were solid ground. A faint light shimmered around him as he streaked forward at incredible speeds. This was the priest, but he had discarded his Taoist robes and cap. He looked like a reckless, unreliable noble. An old man in purple robes followed closely behind him. They moved like lightning, yet their presence was so suppressed that no one below could detect them. Lord Guang, the old man sighed, his face full of worry. You are far too bold. You wander the world, causing chaos. Those old fogies in the Great Han Empire are going to lose their minds. The young man didn't look like Yu Wenming anymore, because his real name was Yu Wenguang. He smirked, looking like a rebellious son who did exactly what he was told not to do. Why should they be angry? Yu Wenguang asked. I am a great celestial. I go where I please. If they want to worry, let them. But you threw a world-extinguishing talisman down there, the old man complained. One mistake, and the entire Nanshan County would have vanished from the map. I'm the one who has to clean up your messes and explain this to the authorities. Yu Wenguang's expression flattened. You think I wanted to? There was a nasty piece of work hiding there. A ghost cultivator with a reincarnation seal. He used some trick to dodge heavenly punishment. If I had fought him head-on, he would have played his trump card and taken the whole county down with him. The old man's face turned serious. A reincarnation seal? That happened over a year ago. If he's been hiding in Great Hong that long, he must have a massive plot. He wasn't after the Empire's secrets, Yu Wenguang said, looking back toward the distant horizon. He wanted my father's legacy. He was trying to refine a pocket dimension and merge it with the spiritual veins to steal an inheritance. But my old man's things aren't that easy to take. The lazy air around Yu Wenguang vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. I will have the top geographers keep watch on all spiritual branches, the old man said firmly. If we find another one, we kill on sight. Fine by me, Yu Wenguang said, his casual tone returning instantly. But it's a shame. I've been out for decades, and I still have 2 items I haven't given away to the right people. Didn't you find 9 destined people centuries ago? The old man asked, suspicious. Are you planning to keep wandering? Of course. 3 of the previous ones died because they had terrible luck, so I had to take the items back. This time, I stayed in that boring little town for a year just to wait for that girl. Yu Wenguang smiled, thinking of me. He laughed, remembering how I had looked at him like he was a total scammer. I finally gave an item away, but then that old ghost showed up. If I hadn't stepped in, she would have been dead the second I left. Anyway, let's head back for a bit. The old man looked overjoyed. Getting the great celestial to go home was usually impossible. In a flash of light, they both vanished, leaving no trace in the sky. That night, the town was silent. Everyone was asleep, but I stood by my window staring at the dark sky. I thought about everything that happened at the manor. I had died once before in my previous life. I thought that would make me brave. I thought I could stay calm in a crisis. I was wrong. When that ghostly fog appeared, I was paralyzed. I shook with fear. I couldn't even move my legs. If the priest hadn't stepped in, I would have been eaten alive without a fight. I'm too weak, I whispered to the darkness. My heart was fragile, my body was frail, and my cultivation was a mess. In the Great Hong Empire, gifted children start training at 8 years old. They usually break through the Qi gathering stage in 6 months. Even late bloomers who start at 13 can usually do it in a month or 2 if they have talent. But I was different. Because my spiritual foundation was shattered, I had been struggling for half a year, and I still hadn't reached the first stage. I spent hours focusing on a single cycle of internal breath. Those who start young can mold their physical foundation to perfection, making it easy for them to form a Qi Si and become grandmasters. Late starters usually fail. Their foundations are flawed, and their potential is limited. Take Miss Inu from Emerald Bamboo Manor, for example. She started at 8 or 9 and was already on the verge of forming her Qi Si. Then there was me. I had struggled for 6 months just to reach the basic chi gathering stage. My spiritual foundation was shattered, my dantian was leaking, and my potential was supposedly zero. The path ahead of me looked like a dead end. In this world, the chi sea is exactly what it sounds like, a vast ocean. Through breathing and meditation, a cultivator gathers tiny streams of energy until they merge into a river and finally, a sea. True masters turn this into a natural habit. They breathe in energy while they eat, work, and walk. Their strength never fades because their internal breath is always full. I didn't know how strong my grandfather, Old Jiang, really was. He had only taught me basic internal breathing, but his guidance was surgical. He told me that if I couldn't make this breathing as natural as an instinct, I would never succeed. I had practiced until it became second nature during the day, but the moment I fell asleep, the rhythm always broke. But something had changed. After the horror at the manor, that Buddhist bead had refined the ghostly fog and returned a trace of pure, untainted essence to my soul. That tiny bit of power had begun to patch the cracks in my broken foundation. For the first time, my dantian could actually hold a sliver of true chi. I tried to isolate the faint black energy and store it in my dantian. I knew that once I stopped my breathing exercises or used up that energy, it would take a long time to return. To my disappointment, the black energy vanished the moment it touched my dantian. It left nothing behind. I shook my head with a bitter smile. I was getting greedy. Before this trip, I was stuck at a dead end. Now, I actually had a chance to keep growing. That pure essence had strengthened me enough to perform my grandfather's needle of thought technique for dozens of breaths at a time. There was another path, body refining, but I dismissed it immediately. That path required turning your own flesh into a divine weapon using massive amounts of rare treasures. I was broke. I couldn't afford to be a human sword. Late that night, I closed my eyes and maintained my breathing rhythm. I prayed I could finally carry it into my dreams. The night passed in silence. When the first light of dawn cracked the horizon, I opened my eyes and realized I had done it. I checked my internal state and felt a surge of joy. My meridians weren't dry. The true chi was still flowing. Even while asleep, my breathing had become a permanent, natural habit. Maybe the brush with death at the manor had acted as a catalyst. I thought about what Priest Yu Wenming had said before he left. He told me that if I ever left this mundane world, I should look for the other 8 beads. I took the 9 beads I had, only one of which was the real treasure, and restrung them on a new cord. I could feel the weight of the magical one against my skin. I slid the bracelet onto my left wrist and stood up. I went to wash my face, but I saw my grandfather's door was already open. The room was empty. In the southern part of the Great Han Empire, spring comes early. I walked toward the river. I saw him there, standing on the embankment. He wore a green robe and leaned on a wooden staff, standing as straight as an ancient pine tree. He was watching the river flow toward the distant mountains. I knew why he was there. A few months ago, a letter had arrived from the capital, and it had nearly killed him with grief. Since his recovery, he hadn't come to the river once. He had been suppressing his longing, afraid that looking at the water would stir up memories he couldn't handle. I stood beside him in silence. We stayed like that for a long time, just like we did when he first rescued me from the river years ago. Eventually, the town woke up. We heard the shouts of vendors and the laughter of children. Smoke began to rise from the chimneys. My grandfather turned to me with a kind smile. "Let's go, kid. It's time to open the clinic." 2 weeks later, I was in the back room of the clinic using a loom. I wasn't weaving silk. I was making simple bandages. The loom was different from anything I remembered from my previous life, and the stitching patterns my grandfather taught me actually helped train my finger dexterity for channeling chi. I had ended up making all the clothes and bandages for the house. "Is Miss Jiang here?" A voice called from the courtyard. I stood up and walked out. 2 young servants stood at the gate. One held a wooden box, and the other carried a roll of high-quality fabric. "Did your young mistress send you?" I asked. I recognized them immediately. They were from Emerald Bamboo Manor. Miss Inu was finally delivering on the promise she made me 2 weeks ago. Half a month later, the promised treasure finally arrived. I had seen the Taoist priest, Yu Wenming, once during those 2 weeks. He mentioned that the items would be sent soon, and he was a man of his word. "Is Miss Jiang here?" A voice called from the gate. I walked out to find two young servants from Emerald Bamboo Manor. One held a polished wooden box, and the other carried a heavy roll of high-quality fabric. "My mistress says she's sorry for the wait," the first servant said, bowing as he handed me the box. "The recommendation letter and the storage bag are both inside." I took the box, but he wasn't finished. "Master and Madam also wanted me to pass on their thanks," he continued. "The master has just recovered from his illness and isn't fit to travel yet, so he couldn't thank you in person. Instead, he sent this roll of red mulberry silk. It's mid-grade fabric. He regrets that high-grade silk is under strict government control and couldn't be brought out, but he hopes this will show his gratitude." The second servant stepped forward and handed me the silk. It was a beautiful, pale green roll that felt heavy and luxurious in my arms. I was surprised. While mid-grade silk wasn't nearly as expensive as the high-grade stuff used for military officer armor, it was still a generous gift. Compared to the priceless storage bag, however, it was just a nice bonus. "Please thank Master Chui for me," I said, nodding since my hands were full. They bowed and took their leave. I went back to the clinic counter and set the silk down. My heart raced as I opened the wooden box. Inside lay a letter and a small pouch. The pouch was pale green, about the size of my palm, with faint, dark red threads woven into the fabric. The letter bore two seals, one from the local authorities and one from Chui Ingyue herself. There was a faint ripple of energy coming from the ink, a specialized seal to prevent forgery. The storage bag was the same color as the silk, likely dyed in the same vat. But the red patterns on the bag were much sharper. That was the secret of red mulberry silk. The threads look white when they are harvested, and the red shimmer only appears through a specific weaving technique. The more obvious the red, the higher the quality. The drawstring and the side stitching were made of a different material, a tough, black thread called Eastleigh Mystery Silk. It was a rare fiber made from processed mineral secretions. The bag wasn't tied shut. I pulled the drawstring, and the mouth opened to reveal a pitch-black void. Even when I held it up to the sunlight, the interior stayed perfectly dark. I focused my mind and channeled my chi into the opening. Suddenly, my consciousness expanded. Inside was a perfect cube of space, about 10 feet wide and 10 feet high. It was completely empty. I tested it by dropping the letter inside. Instead of falling to the bottom, the letter seemed to phase through the gray walls of the space and floated exactly where I wanted it to. To my surprise, the interior was brightly lit, even though there was no sun. It was incredible. I had never seen anything like it. I noticed flickering runes glowing on the 6 gray walls inside, mirroring the tiny, intricate symbols etched into the black drawstring outside. Chui Ingyue had explained this to me before. The bag worked by slowly consuming the energy from the space walls to maintain its anchor to our world. The walls would then naturally repair themselves by absorbing spiritual energy from the void. If the string broke, the bag would just lock shut. But if the internal structure failed, the whole space would collapse, and everything inside would be shredded into nothingness. I marveled at the craftsmanship for a long time. This was a treasure I had to keep hidden. It was too valuable to show off. Just as I tucked the bag away, my grandfather returned. He was leaning heavily on his cane, carrying a single fish for dinner. Only a few months ago, he could climb mountains to pick herbs without breaking a sweat. Now his steps were shaky and slow. He looked so much older. Time blurred as summer began to fade. I used the red mulberry silk to sew a new green robe for him and made myself a simple short-sleeved shirt with the leftovers. But soon, my grandfather was confined to his bed. It was the cruel irony of being a doctor. He could save others, but he couldn't save himself. The various ailments he had suppressed for years were exploding all at once. The fact that he was still breathing was a miracle in itself. I sat by his bed in the quiet clinic. We had been closed for over a month, only opening for the most desperate emergencies. I stayed to keep him company, to ease the loneliness of his final days. "Little girl," he whispered. His voice, once booming and full of life, was now paper-thin. 20 years, he rasped, his withered hand suddenly gripping mine with surprising strength. His dull eyes flickered with a final spark of memory. "It's been 20 years since I was exiled." He began to tell me his story in broken fragments. In his youth, he had been arrogant and talented. He went to the capital to make his mark on the medical world. He spent half his life struggling until he finally joined the powerful Zhao family as a retainer. That was how he became a palace physician. I succeeded, he coughed, his grip tightening. But it was short-lived. I made a mistake with a prescription, and the prince's favorite consort died. To protect themselves, the Zhao family killed my son. They threw me out. The court only spared my life and sent me back here because of my past service to the emperor. As he spoke the last word, the light in his eyes faded. His strength vanished, but he didn't let go of my hand. Outside, the late summer rain began to fall. It was a heavy, silent downpour that matched the stillness in the room. September arrived. The sky was clear, but heavy clouds still hung low on the horizon, refusing to let the crisp autumn air through. On a nameless hill outside the town, a new grave stood. I stood before it alone. My journey was about to begin. A young girl in green stood before the grave, her expression cold and indifferent. If you looked closely at the fabric of her pale green robes, you could see faint, dark red patterns woven into the silk. I stood there, reciting a poem for the old man. It was a short verse about cold winds and migrating geese, a final tribute to the only family I had known in this life. We had only spent a few years together, but he was my last connection to this world. Now, I had to face the reality of life and death. On the day he died, after he finished telling me about his life's regrets, he actually started to laugh. He looked at me and said, "You girl, it seems you really don't have any talent for medicine. Haha, forget it, forget it. You should go out and see the world. Maybe that's what's best for you." I asked him if I should try to settle his old grudges if I ever made it to the capital. He just shook his head silently, refusing to speak of the past again. We sat there talking until his voice grew faint and finally stopped. He fell into a sleep he would never wake from. Buried with him was the only real affection I had left. I didn't feel much resentment toward this world or my past life, but I felt a hollow space in my chest, as if a deep emotion had been carved out. Honestly, I shouldn't have let myself get so attached to these daily routines. I had too many secrets to uncover. But because I lacked power, I had allowed myself to rest in the warmth of family for a while. The world thought I was a survivor of the Starfall calamity from 2 years ago, a disaster that left thousands homeless. They thought my parents died in the ruins and I drifted to Nanshan County alone. But I knew the truth. I didn't drift here. I was thrown here directly from that falling star. With my current strength, I had no way to go back and find out what really happened. I looked up at the sky and whispered to myself, maybe if I had power like Priest Yuan Ming, these mysteries would finally make sense. After the funeral, I didn't reopen the clinic. I only saw patients for emergencies. Soon, the neighbors started whispering that little Dr. Jiang was leaving for the provincial capital to study. It wasn't an impulsive choice. I had decided back in the summer that if the old man made it through autumn, I'd wait until next year. If he didn't, I'd leave immediately. One morning, I went to the blacksmith, Zhou. I picked up 3 custom-made short swords, thin, 1.5-foot blades. I paid him in silence, my face a mask. Then I hit the market to stock up on supplies. To the townspeople, I looked unaffected by my grandfather's death. But the neighbors who knew me well noticed the change. When the old man was alive, I was always talking and laughing. Now, I was a different person. I spent my final days in the clinic processing the remaining herbs. I turned everything, blood-stanching grass, wild jar flowers, and bruise-healing herbs, into ointments and detox powders. I packed some into my medical bag and hid the rest in my storage bag. I took the 3 short swords and hid 2 of them in the magical bag as well. For the third, I wrapped the hilt in red mulberry silk and tied the thread to my wrist guard before sliding it into a leather sheath at my waist. This was my first long trip since arriving in this town. Back in my previous life, I was a thug who traveled constantly, but I still prepared with extreme caution. I was currently a 14-year-old girl. In this empire, the roads between towns and counties were rarely maintained by the government. My town was a military hub, so there was a road to Nanshui County, but the journey to the provincial capital was over 1,000 miles. To cross county lines, you needed official travel permits. The gaps between counties were no man's lands, wild territories officially managed by the province, but crawling with danger. There were predators, bandits, and rumors of terrifying demonic beasts. Since I had just buried my grandfather, there was no way I could get a permit in time to start the new school term. I asked Cui Yingyue for advice on how to travel safely. Her answer was simple: join a merchant caravan. The Great Han Empire was strict about people moving between counties, but they made exceptions for merchants and escort agencies. The government needed the taxes these caravans paid to maintain the relay stations every 30 miles. People like me, who didn't have papers, would just join a caravan and pass through under their name. As long as the group wasn't too big, the guards didn't care. There were downsides, of course. Caravans were slow, covering maybe 30 miles a day. It would take me over 10 days to reach the capital. Plus, their routes didn't always go exactly where I needed to be. I was stuck with both problems. The permit would take months, so I had to go now. I joined a caravan led by the Cui family. We would travel from our town to Nanshui, then to Jiangyong, and finally to Yongbei County. I signed on as their traveling medic, which solved the permit issue. But once we hit Yongbei, the Cui caravan would head west by river, while I needed to go north. Cui Yingyue arranged for me to be handed off to another caravan heading north once we reached the halfway point. I was satisfied with the plan, though a bit worried about joining a group of strangers in a place like Jiangyong. I told myself everything would work out. I wasn't some delicate lady of a high house, after all. I was just a half-baked doctor trying to survive. I felt ready. I had prepared everything I could, so there was no reason to worry. The next day, I closed the doors of my medical clinic and headed to the gathering point for the caravan. Cui Yingyue met me there to go over a few final details. She gave me a brief nod, said her goodbyes, and left. I recognized the man leading the group immediately. His name was Zhang Lianqing. He was a veteran martial artist from the local hall and a seasoned caravan leader. Many of his disciples had come to my clinic over the years to treat injuries from their training, so when he saw me, he greeted me with genuine warmth. I wasn't a total stranger to the rest of the crew, either. Out of the 100 or so people in the caravan, I knew nearly half of them. Seeing familiar faces made me feel a lot safer about the first leg of this journey. The caravan slowly crossed the stone bridge leading out of town. We were officially on our way. At that moment, as I looked back at the fading skyline, I had no idea that when I finally returned to this town 100 years later, I would carry two completely different, legendary titles. It was early autumn in Nanshui County. The rainy season had ended, replaced by a dry heat that would last all through the fall. The sky was a vibrant, cloudless blue. This was the best time for merchants and escorts to travel. The plan was to bypass the cities of Nanshui and Jiangyong and head straight for Yongnan. We would rest there for a few days before boarding a ship to head west. This route saved me a lot of time. But as the old saying goes, if nothing goes wrong, something is about to go wrong. On the 6th day, just as we crossed the border into the next district, our scout came galloping back. His face was grim. He leaped off his horse before it even fully stopped and whispered something to Zhang Lianqing. The leader's calm expression vanished instantly. His eyes went wide. He turned to the group and roared with a voice like a bronze bell. Front, 23 wild mountain boars detected. There's a king among them. The air turned cold. Guards, weapons up. Everyone else, use the wagons as a barrier. Form a circle. Women and the sick in the center. Get the horses to the rear. 23 boars was bad enough, but a king? That changed everything. The atmosphere turned deadly serious. 30 guards grabbed their spears and blades, rushing to the front. The rest of us, the non-combatants and the women, scrambled off the wagons. In less than 15 minutes, we had the carts locked in a defensive ring. I was the only medic, so I was tucked away in the very center with the women. I dropped my medical bag to the side. I wasn't going to just sit there. I felt the thin silk thread hidden in my sleeve, tied securely to the hilt of my short sword. I gripped the leather scabbard with my left hand and rested my right on the hilt. I wasn't going to leave my life in someone else's hands again. We were pinned between two red clay hills covered in low shrubs. Up ahead, the road was flanked by a pine forest, the perfect hunting ground for mountain boars. These beasts are the tyrants of the wilderness. They are aggressive, they run in packs, and under the leadership of a king, they fear nothing. They'll charge a tiger or a dragon if it gets in their way. Suddenly, the forest ahead exploded in a cloud of dust. I heard the high-pitched, rhythmic squealing and a thundering vibration that felt like an earthquake. Trees 100 yards away were being snapped like toothpicks. It sounded like a prehistoric monster was coming for us. Zhang Lianqing stood alone at the very front of our line. Behind him were the heavy hitters with their polearms. Behind them, the wagons. The king boar burst from the tree-line. It was massive. Zhang Lianqing didn't flinch. He released his inner qi, his muscles bulging until they looked like they might burst. He stepped forward, launching himself like an arrow. Dragon roar punch, he bellowed. A dull, heavy thud echoed through the clearing. The power of a master in the 100 refinement realm was on full display. His fist slammed into the beast's snout, snapping one of its massive tusks instantly. The king boar screeched. Zhang's punch had enough force to stop its momentum dead. He didn't let go. He grabbed the remaining tusk with his left hand, dug his heels into the dirt, and entered a brutal test of strength with the monster. "I've got the king," he yelled, his face strained. "Kill the others. Now." With the king's charge broken, the rest of the pack lost half their momentum. The guards moved in, working in pairs to intercept and slaughter the smaller boars. A few managed to break through and slam into the wagons, but the carts were too heavy to move. Then I saw it. To our left, a massive cloud of dust rose from behind a small hill. 5 more boars leaped out in a surprise flank. Everyone was focused on the main fight at the front. The left side of our wagon circle was completely undefended. "Back up! Defend the flank!" someone screamed, but it was too late. The first boar slammed into a wagon, knocking it sideways. The second followed, flipping a cart entirely. "Run! Get out of there!" the guards shouted to the women in the center. Panic took over. Everyone except me froze or huddled together, paralyzed by fear. A third boar smashed through the gap, tripped over the wreckage, and tumbled, but the hole was open. The last 2 boars charged straight into the center of the circle, aiming for the defenseless crowd. If they hit, people were going to die. I moved. I drew my short sword and, in one fluid motion, hurled it forward. The people around me gasped. In their eyes, I was a dead man. Using a light weapon like a sword against the thick, armored hide of a mountain boar was suicide. They thought it was all over. I was only a 14-year-old girl who had recently reached the stone strength stage. To the onlookers, I had just thrown away my only weapon. They thought it was over. They thought we were all going to die. Most people closed their eyes, unable to watch the coming slaughter. But my face remained calm. As the short sword flew through the air, my right index finger twitched, pulling a nearly invisible silk thread attached to the hilt. The blade defied every law of physics. It veered sharply from the upper right to the lower left, slicing clean through the neck of the lead boar. Its head hit the dirt before its body even realized it was dead. I didn't stop. I flicked my middle finger upward. The sword danced, carving a reverse arc from the ground up. The second boar didn't even have time to grunt before its tusks and half its skull were sheared away. Blood sprayed across the grass in a violent crimson fan. With a flick of my wrist, the sword spun through the air in a perfect circle and snapped back into my hand. I gave it a sharp sideways jerk, shaking the thick boar blood off the steel. The guards and travelers stood frozen. It was impossible. 2 strikes, 2 kills, executed with a grace that bordered on the supernatural. Even the remaining 3 boars were stunned. Their animal instincts screamed at them to run. They turned tail and scrambled back over the hill, disappearing as fast as they had arrived. I kept my sword ready, eyes scanning the ridge. "Someone fix this gap," I shouted. My voice snapped them out of their trance. Several men dropped their weapons and rushed to the overturned wagon, straining together to heave it back upright and seal the hole in our defenses. At the front of the caravan, the main battle was finally winding down. Zhang Lianqing had successfully pinned the Boar King down, allowing the guards to use their defensive stances to pick off the pack one by one. Seeing his subordinates slaughtered, the Boar King let out a final, frustrated roar. He surged forward with a burst of hidden strength, shoved Zhang Lianqing back, and bolted into the woods. The surviving boars followed their leader, and just like that, the crisis was over. The aftermath was messy but manageable. 2 guards had their thighs pierced by tusks, serious wounds, but not fatal. Most of the other 30 people had only minor scrapes. Zhang Lianqing was the worst off among the survivors. His arms were badly strained from using his dragon roar spring technique and wrestling with the king. Dealing with these injuries was second nature to me. I spent the next half day cleaning wounds, stitching skin, and applying salves. While I worked, Zhang Lianqing couldn't stop staring at me. He had heard about the 2 miraculous strikes that saved the center of the camp. He couldn't wrap his head around how a frail-looking girl like me could cut through the armored hide of a mountain boar so easily. To a normal martial artist, those hides were a nightmare for small weapons like short swords. What he didn't know was that I hadn't used raw strength. I had used the mysterious black energy within me to manipulate the blade. In that moment of desperation, I realized I couldn't dodge, so I had to strike. Now I had a better grasp of my limits. I estimated I could pull off about 8 to 10 of those powered strikes before my energy reserves hit zero. We continued our journey for several days, winding along the southern bank of the Nanshui River. The terrain was beautiful but dangerous, with the rushing water to our side and rolling hills to the other. We faced a few more predator attacks, but nothing as organized as the boar pack. By the time we reached the borders of Yongnan, I realized how taxing this trip really was. I had already burned through half the medicine in my bags. Luckily, the caravan paid well for my services, and the herbs I used were common enough to restock. Plus, no one knew I had a secret stash of high-grade medicine hidden in my storage bag. Yongnan was less of a city and more of a massive, sprawling port built into a deep water bend of the river. The air smelled of salt, wet wood, and trade. Old Wang, Old Li, go find the boatman we talked to. Zhang Lianqing barked as we pulled into the camping grounds. We rest today and head south by ship tomorrow. The 2 guards nodded to Zhang and then gave me a respectful bow before heading out. Ever since I killed those boars, the atmosphere in the caravan had changed. They no longer saw me as just a little girl who knew how to wrap bandages. They saw me as a hidden master, and they treated me with the same deference they gave their leader. Zhang Lianqing was taking this personally, which made sense given his reputation. He led me through several rows of tents until we reached a larger camp. A flag fluttered above the entrance, bearing a large, red character for the Hong family. We had already received word at the border station that their caravan had arrived in Yongnan. Zhang stepped forward and saluted the 2 guards at the gate. After a brief exchange, one of them hurried inside the camp. A few moments later, a middle-aged man with a light beard and a solid build walked out. He was dressed in tight black robes, looking every bit the experienced traveler. When he saw Zhang, a wide smile broke across his face. He hurried over with his hands clasped in a respectful greeting. He called Zhang, Brother Zhang, and claimed to be flattered by the visit. Zhang laughed, clapping the man on the shoulder. He introduced him as Manager Liu. Zhang didn't waste any time. He turned to me and introduced me as Jiang Yi, a doctor from Nanshui. He explained that I needed to head south by ship and asked Liu to take me on as a traveling physician for the Hong caravan. Liu agreed immediately. He called Zhang the River Dragon, and it was clear he wouldn't dream of refusing such a high-profile request. Still, he couldn't help but study me with curiosity. I stood there in my pale green robes, my medical bag over my shoulder, and gave him a polite bow. Liu wondered aloud why a man of Zhang's stature was personally escorting a young girl. The Hong caravan was already publicly recruiting doctors, so I could have just applied like anyone else. He was looking for the hidden connection. Zhang, patient despite his rugged exterior, explained the situation. He told Liu that Cui Yingyue, the eldest daughter of the Cui family, had personally requested that I be looked after. Liu's eyes lit up the moment he heard her name. A look of genuine respect crossed his face. I hadn't realized Cui Yingyue's fame reached this far. Back at the manor, she already acted like the head of the house despite her father being alive. Now I saw that her influence wasn't just local. Zhang wasn't finished. He leaned in and told Liu that I wasn't just a doctor. He bragged about my sword skills, telling him how I had decapitated 2 wild boars in a single breath when the caravan was attacked. He admitted that few of his own men could have pulled that off. Liu's expression shifted to one of surprise. His gaze dropped to the short sword hanging at my waist in its oxhide sheath. I just shook my head and told them Uncle Zhang was exaggerating. I told them it was just luck. Suddenly, a voice drifted out from the large tent behind them. Someone was asking if we were talking about Lady Yingyue. A young man in expensive, flamboyant silk robes stepped out. He looked like a typical wealthy playboy. Manager Lu bowed instantly, identifying him as the young master of the Hong family. Lu introduced us, calling Zhang a great hero and me the new physician joining their ranks. I bowed slightly, watching the young man. He was handsome in a conventional way, but he carried an air of arrogance that I recognized all too well. As he moved, I noticed faint rashes and sores on his wrists. Given my experience from my previous life, I knew exactly what kind of lifestyle caused those marks. He was a regular at the brothels. He looked me up and down. When he mentioned Inyue's name, his eyes took on a slimy, uncomfortable quality. Before I could even respond to him, two women in revealing silk outfits spilled out of the tent. They clung to his arms, whining about him, leaving them alone. He didn't even try to be discreet. He pulled them close, laughing and flirting right in front of us. He spoke about Inyue as if she were a prize, wondering if becoming a geomancer would finally make her notice him. The two women played along, engaging in a display of public affection that made even manager Lu cough in embarrassment. The young master finally decided to head back inside, but not before turning back to look at me. He gave me a long, meaningful smirk, his eyes bloodshot and predatory. I felt the familiar sting of trouble brewing. I kept my face like a calm pool of water, showing nothing, but my mind was racing. In my past life, when I was a desperate thug, I had spent far too much time as a lackey for spoiled brats like him. I knew that look. Zhang Lianxing was an old hand in the underworld, and he clearly saw the danger too. He looked at me with concern, then turned back to manager Lu to finalize the details. "I'll leave it in your hands then, brother," Zhang Lianxing said. He walked away, leaving me with manager Lu. The manager personally led me toward the area where the female members of the caravan were camped. He had a servant arrange a place for me to stay and reminded me that the caravan would be setting out at dawn. I thanked him again, but I didn't go inside to rest. Instead, I started wandering between the nearby tents. I introduced myself to everyone I met. The people were curious about me. A young girl working as a traveling doctor wasn't something they saw every day, so they treated me with a lot of warmth. From our conversations, I learned there was a commercial district nearby. It had several pharmacies that sold common medical supplies. My current stock wasn't empty, but my medicine bag was already half depleted. I figured I should take this chance to restock. You never know when an emergency might hit. The shopping district in Yongnan was squeezed along the single road leading to the city gates. Narrow alleys branched off between the shops, leading to a dense maze of small wooden shacks. The docks and the harbor took up most of the city's space. To keep the profitable grain taxes flowing, the residents were forced to live packed together like sardines. In a place like this, people lived on top of each other. That kind of environment naturally bred gangs and complicated power struggles. There were countless people willing to risk everything just to survive another day. I walked down the street with my worn-out medicine bag slung over my shoulder. After days of traveling, my light green clothes had lost their luster. I looked like just another face in the crowd. I didn't stand out at all. I visited 3 different pharmacies. I kept a straight face as I haggled aggressively with the shopkeepers. By the time I was done, I had scored a fresh supply of hemostatic powder, insect repellent, fever medicine, and chi-restoring pills. My mood lifted instantly. As I stepped out of the last shop, I saw something in a side alley. 2 men in caravan guard uniforms were cornering a woman. She was dressed simply, her hair pinned up in the style of a married woman. She looked terrified. I slowed my pace. I wasn't looking because I was a hero. I was looking because those guards were wearing the Hong family colors. My own caravan. The woman was screaming for help. She spotted me the same moment the guards did. My lip twitched. Of all the luck. "Help me. Please, save me," she cried. She took advantage of the guard's momentary confusion and lunged forward. She threw herself onto the cobblestones at my feet and grabbed my right leg with a death grip. My eyelids flickered. I looked down at the short sword hanging from my waist. She probably thought I was some wandering knight-errant here to deliver justice. Then I looked at the guards. Their eyes weren't malicious. They just looked surprised to see me. Finally, I looked at the ground where the woman had been dragged. 2 small, oil paper packets lay there. They were torn, spilling a bit of dark red powder onto the dirt. "Dr. Jiang," one of the guards muttered. They recognized me. Manager Liu had personally escorted me into the camp, so every guard knew who I was. I didn't say a word. I just stared down at the woman clutching my leg. The woman's heart must have dropped. She realized I was with them. She looked up at my face, expecting to see a young, naive girl. Instead, she found a cold, sharp expression. I looked at her like she was a pile of trash. Before she could scream again, I kicked her square in the chest. I didn't hold back. The blow sent her rolling back into the alley. She collapsed, coughing violently, her breath stolen from her lungs. As she tried to crawl up to beg for mercy, I stepped forward and brought my foot down hard on her arm. A loud, sickening crack echoed through the alley. Her bone snapped clean. The two guards stood frozen. They were stunned. They knew I was a doctor, but they didn't expect me to be this ruthless. Weren't they the ones supposedly assaulting her? Shouldn't I be shouting at them to stop their beastly behavior? They couldn't wrap their heads around it. The woman wailed in the shadows, clutching her broken arm. I slowly walked out of the alley, a calm smile returning to my face. "Please, brothers, continue," I said smoothly. "I was just passing through. Don't mind me." I turned and walked away. The two guards looked at each other, then at the sobbing woman, and then back at the direction I had disappeared. After seeing those two brutal kicks, they suddenly lost all interest. They muttered under their breaths and left the alley. An hour later, I still hadn't returned to the camp. I was in a slum near the edge of the district, bandaging the wounds of two children who had fallen while playing. One of them had fallen from a height and landed on his hand. His left shoulder was completely dislocated. The poor kid was screaming his head off. I had dealt with plenty of crying, injured children back at the clinic. I knew the drill. I pulled out a few pieces of candy to use as bait, coaxing the little girl to stay still while I worked. Then, with a movement so fast she didn't even see it coming, I snapped her dislocated joint back into place. The girl didn't even have time to scream. Before she could even mutter a thank you, she looked behind me, her eyes widening as if she'd seen a ghost. She and her friends scrambled to their feet and bolted away, trembling with fear. The faint smile on my face vanished. I stood up and turned around slowly. Standing there was a dark-skinned man with short hair and no beard. He was dressed like a typical dock worker and gripped a heavy wooden staff in his hand. His expression was cold. My right hand instinctively drifted to the hilt of the short sword at my waist. At the man's feet lay the two Hong family guards I had seen earlier. Their faces were swollen like pig heads, covered in bruises and cuts. Even while pinned to the ground, they were still running their mouths, shouting threats about how a dock-working dog shouldn't dare touch anyone from the Hong family. But despite their big words, they didn't dare move an inch. They were terrified the man would give them another taste of his staff. "Miss, why did you hurt my wife?" the young man asked. His voice was thick with suppressed rage, his brows knitted together in a fierce glare. He studied me, a young woman in a pale green robe, carrying a medical bag, trying to reconcile the image of the kind doctor who just treated those children with the ruthless person who had broken a woman's arm. "So, that woman is your wife?" I replied, my voice flat. "Did you know she was about to be assaulted?" The man glanced down at the two guards. They immediately shut up, their arrogance vanishing under his gaze. He looked back at me. "They didn't succeed. I gave them a lesson for it. But that doesn't explain why you broke her arm." I let out a sudden, mocking chuckle. "Look at it this way. At least I saved her from a much worse fate, didn't I?" The man's grip tightened on his staff until his knuckles turned white. He looked ready to strike, wanting to teach this arrogant girl a lesson. Even the guards on the ground were shocked. They knew I was blunt, but they didn't realize I was this cold-blooded. They didn't care about the assault charge. The Hong family was powerful enough to make a scandal like that disappear, but they were starting to realize I was more dangerous than I looked. "You bitch," the man spat, losing his patience. "Are you trying to start a fight with the Green Gang?" He swung the staff back, ready to crush me. "Whoosh your powder," I said softly. The man froze mid-swing. His momentum died instantly. I watched him, seeing his explosive temper hit a brick wall. I reached into my robe and pulled out a small oil paper packet I had picked up in the alley, the one the woman had dropped. I tore a tiny corner, letting a bit of dark red powder spill out, then tossed the whole packet to him. His pupils shrunk the moment he saw the powder. He caught it with one hand and shoved it into his pocket, his face returning to a mask of forced calm. "You talk about me picking a fight with the Green Gang?" I asked, that faint, calm smile returning to my face. "Your wife was openly selling wuxia powder, a substance strictly banned by the government, to the Hong family caravan. Isn't that a provocation against us first?" I stepped closer. "I know that even if I reported this to the officials, your gang has ways to make the evidence disappear. But you and your wife? You'd be the sacrificial lambs. So, since you came here alone, tell me, how do you want to settle this?" We stood in a tense standoff for only a moment before Manager Liu arrived from the camp, followed by several guards. The shouting of the two captured guards had finally drawn their attention. Manager Liu glanced at the two men on the ground, his expression unreadable. His 10 guards surrounded the dark-skinned man, their hands hovering near their sword hilts. The atmosphere was electric. The man didn't flinch. He stared back at Manager Liu, showing no fear despite the powder I had just handed him. The exchange had been so fast that only he and the 2 guards on the ground had seen what the packet contained. To the onlookers, I had just thrown him a piece of trash. "I am Chao Zhen of the Green Gang," the man announced. "These 2 tried to violate my wife. They failed, and I dealt with them. But this woman, she broke my wife's arm." Chao Zhen didn't understand why I hadn't exposed the drugs in front of everyone, but he didn't care. He was here for blood. "Green Gang," Manager Liu muttered, his brow furrowing. The Green Gang was just a group of dock workers, nothing compared to the wealthy Hong family. However, the Hong family relied on those workers to move their goods. If the gang started causing trouble at the docks, the loss in time and money would be staggering. Liu realized Chao Zhen had come alone. He was using his background to demand respect, but he clearly wanted to settle this privately. "And how does Brother Chao wish to resolve this?" Manager Liu asked, testing the waters. He was willing to let the beating of his guards slide. They were idiots who got caught, after all, as long as the family's reputation stayed intact. "The 2 who tried to touch my wife have been punished. That part is over," Chao Zhen said, his eyes turning sharp as he locked onto me. "But she drew blood. She has to pay the price." Manager Liu looked at me. I knew what he was thinking. No matter how much he respected me or my connection to the Chui family, I was still an outsider. If I caused a headache for the Hong family's business, his friendliness would evaporate. I didn't wait for him to speak. I looked at Chao Zhen and, to everyone's surprise, I gave a shallow bow. "I was reckless," I said calmly. "Please accept my apologies." I didn't specify what I was reckless about, but Chao Zhen knew. After bowing, I reached into my medical bag and pulled out a long strip of oil paper and several bottles of high-grade medicine. I handed them to a guard to pass over to him. "Inside this package is a secret bone-setting medicine passed down through my family," I said, my voice steady. "It's called the bone-knitting ointment. I've also included several bottles of medicine for blood circulation and general healing. Please, take them as my apology." Manager Liu's eyes lit up. He quickly signaled a guard to take the items and hand them over to Chao Zhen. Chao Zhen looked stunned. He probably expected me to be another arrogant person from a wealthy family who would rather die than lose face. He certainly didn't expect me to apologize so cleanly. He took the medicine and shoved it into his pocket, but the fire in his eyes didn't die out. I knew why he had come alone. He was poor and had spent his life as a dock worker in the Green Gang, practicing martial arts in his spare time. He and his wife were just 2 desperate people trying to survive. They had taken a risk by selling wuxia powder for the gang, a job that offered no protection if they got caught. But his wife's hand was broken, and his pride wouldn't let him leave without blood for blood. Giving her medicine for her broken hand is only right, Chao Zhen growled, tightening his grip on his long staff. "But you dared to hurt my woman. I will have my revenge." He was determined. He wanted to beat me down to satisfy his rage. "Brother Chao," Manager Liu interrupted, his voice dripping with impatience. "Dr. Jiang has already apologized and given you precious medicine. Don't push your luck." Liu was done playing nice. He released a wave of qi from his 100 refinement realm cultivation. The pressure hit the dozen or so guards like a physical weight, making the air heavy. But Chao Zhen didn't flinch. He stood as straight as a ship's mast, staring me down. "Manager Liu," Chao Zhen shouted, "1,000 years ago, there was a girl named Pei from Luapa Valley. At 14, she became a grandmaster and wiped out a gang of 1,000 bandits. Today, Miss Jiang is the same age, dressed like a wandering swordsman, and clearly has the courage to strike people down. I, Chao Zhan, am not worthy, but I must challenge her to 3 moves. The crowd gasped. He was using killing with praise, comparing me to a legendary figure to force me into a fight. Manager Lu was furious. He stepped forward to end it, but I reached for my short sword and stepped past him. Brother Chao, you're joking, I said with a light laugh. I'm just a traveling doctor. I couldn't possibly compare to the legendary heroine Pei. But since you're so interested, I'll give you 1 move. 1 move. The crowd shifted, realizing I had just cut his 3 moves down to 1. They looked at Chao Zhan, dark skin, solid muscles, steady breathing. He was a veteran of the stone-lifting realm. Then they looked at me. I was young, thin, and a doctor. Could I actually hold my own? Some of the Hong family guards remembered what Zhang Lianxing had said earlier, that I had decapitated 2 mountain boars with 2 quick strikes. Most thought he was exaggerating. Now, they weren't so sure. I set my medical bag aside and pulled some hemp bandages from it. I wrapped them tightly around the hilt and the scabbard, locking the sword in place so it wouldn't slide out. Then, I gripped it with my right hand and gave it 2 test swings. Chao Zhan's hesitation lasted only a second. He had been in the stone-lifting realm for 10 years. He had mastered all 49 variations of his staff technique. He figured I was just a talented beginner from the borderlands. He had the experience. He had the reach. 1 move, then he spat. He dropped into a rock-solid horse stance, his hands gripping the staff tight. He wasn't going to hold back. He aimed straight for my temple, intending to end me in a single strike. He lunged, his body moving like a dragon emerging from the sea. The staff whistled through the air, shifting through a dozen variations in a heartbeat, closing the distance instantly. I remained calm. I felt like the apprentice I used to be, practicing basic swings in a small-town gym. I gripped my sheathed sword with both hands and swung horizontally. I wasn't aiming for him. I was aiming for the staff. In martial arts, they say an inch longer is an inch stronger. His staff should have dominated my short sword. But he didn't expect my speed. Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap. A visible ripple of air exploded from the point of impact. My sheathed blade slammed into the wood with the force of a falling boulder. The staff snapped instantly. The shockwave traveled up the wood, ripping the front half of the staff from Chao Zhan's grip and shattering his momentum. He stumbled back, his face pale, his hands trembling. The courtyard went silent. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I unwrapped the bandages, tucked the sword back into my belt, and rested my hand lightly on the hilt. Brother Chao, I said softly, my voice echoing in the silence. I said 1 move. And that was it. The words hit him harder than the blow. It was the ultimate humiliation, crushing the last of his pride. Manager Lu was the first to snap out of it. As a 100 refinement expert, he saw exactly what had happened. Chao Zhan's technique was solid, and his reach was superior. If I had tried to block or defend, his internal energy would have pierced right through my guard. But I hadn't defended. I had simply overpowered him with raw, terrifying force. I knew exactly what I was doing. For a martial artist at the bone-strengthening stage, the physical body is still vulnerable. A direct hit to the head from a weapon would be fatal. But I didn't choose to block, and I didn't try any foolish maneuvers to close the gap. I had aimed for his weapon from the start. My calm demeanor wasn't a facade, it was a calculation. I had struck the exact point on that staff to ensure it snapped. Manager Lu saw it too. He realized I had used this poor Green Gang laborer to make a statement. I was marking my territory. Chao Zhan stared blankly at the broken wood in his hands. He looked up at me, seeing the slight smile still on my face, and the light in his eyes simply died. His back, once as straight as a spear, slumped like a dying tree. He bowed deeply, to me, to Manager Lu, and to the surrounding Hong family guards. Then he turned and walked away like a hollow shell. He didn't even look back at his broken staff. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. The 2 guards he had beaten crawled to their feet. They joined the others in bowing to me with newfound respect. They were secretly relieved. I hadn't mentioned the prohibited 5-stone powder to Manager Lu. If I had, they would have been finished. I watched Chao Zhan disappear into the distance. I wasn't being cruel for the sake of it. I was a young man in a strange, dangerous environment. If I didn't establish dominance now, every bully and coward in the area would be lining up to test me. Chaojin was just unlucky. The plan had started forming the moment I saw his wife and that packet of illegal powder. She was young and pretty, a poor local whose husband was clearly at the bottom of the Green Gang hierarchy. After I broke her arm, I intentionally loitered near the Hong family camp for half an hour, waiting. I knew he would come. The moment Chaojin appeared alone, I knew I had won. He and his wife were already pawns being discarded by the Green Gang. Trafficking 5-stone powder is a capital offense in the Great Hong Empire. In remote places like Nanshan County, officials and gangs usually work together, but nobody dares to flaunt the law in broad daylight. It's an insult to the emperor's authority. To protect themselves, the Green Gang would inevitably make Chao Jun and his wife the scapegoats. They would claim the smuggling was a personal act. Chao Jun knew this. He knew his gang wouldn't back him up. That's why he came alone to vent his rage on the guards and seek revenge on me before fleeing the county. The rest went exactly as I envisioned. Whether it was Manager Liu intervening or Chao Jun insisting on a fight, I played my part. I even put on a show of apologizing and giving him medicine. He had no idea the ancestral healing bombs I gave him were just cheap jars I bought at a local shop and relabeled. Honestly, I suspected the shopkeeper had sold me fakes anyway. It was the perfect way to get rid of them. The only real variable was the duel. But when I saw his staff was made of Kundian wood, I knew I could break it. It's a hard, heavy wood used for making oars in the south. It's durable, but it lacks the flexibility of a traditional martial arts staff. It's brittle under the right kind of pressure. Between my training with Grandpa and the terrifying power of the black energy in my soul, my precision was far beyond an ordinary fighter. Even if I had missed, Chao Jun's internal energy wasn't strong enough to kill me in one hit. The result? The Green Gang and the Hong family stayed out of it. I established my reputation without offending the higher-ups. Only Chao Jun and his wife got hurt. I didn't care about his fate. I might be a weak practitioner in the grand scheme of things, but I have no problem striking down those even weaker than me. In my past life, I died because of my kindness. Whatever mercy I had left was buried on that nameless hill in Shenzhen along with my grandpa. I knew this display would keep the small fry away for a few days. My only concern now was the young master, Hong Wei. I could tell he had his eye on me. A spoiled brat like him usually needs a much harder lesson before he learns to stop playing with fire. But for now, I could only take it one step at a time. The next morning, the autumn sky was clear and vast. The rising sun painted the green mountains in gold, and a cool breeze swept through the camp. I had spent the night in a meditative trance, so I woke up feeling refreshed. The long journey didn't bother me. I helped the crew pack the tents, ate a quick breakfast, and watched as the massive caravan roared back to life. We set off again, deeper into the unknown. The Hong family caravan was a massive operation. There were over 200 people in total, including 3 established masters of the 100 refinement stage. With strength like that, mountain beasts didn't dare block our path. Unless we were ambushed by a bandit army of 500 men, this caravan was essentially a moving fortress. I didn't bother riding in the carriages. I walked with the rest of the crew on foot. To be honest, walking on flat ground for 3 days straight was nothing to me. Back in the day, I spent my life scaling jagged cliffs to gather herbs for Grandpa. I had learned to coordinate my breathing with every step. Even after climbing for a full day and night, I could keep my energy levels high. But as I walked, memories of the past 2 years kept bubbling up. I tried to stay focused on the road. We had been traveling for 2 days and were finally leaving the borders of Yongnan. In another 2 or 3 days, we would reach Nanshan City. Despite the smooth travel, a knot of unease tightened in my chest. My display of force 3 days ago had earned me some respect among the hired hands, and my plain appearance usually kept me out of trouble. But I couldn't forget the way Hong Wei, the young master, had looked at me. I used to be a street thug. I knew his type. A spoiled brat who runs wild and his family's shadow won't stop until he feels real pain. Fear doesn't stick to people like him unless it's carved into their skin. Night fell, bringing a chilly autumn breeze. The sky over Nanshan was dry and cloudless, and the temperature dropped fast. I was inside a large tent, tending to 4 workers who had caught a nasty cold from the shifting weather. I had just finished feeding the last patient his medicine when a burly guard walked in. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I glanced at him and felt a heavy sigh building in my lungs. It was happening. "Miss Jiang," the man said, trying to be polite. "My third young master requests your presence. He'd like you to come over for a bit." I kept cleaning the medicine bowls, acting confused. "Is Master Hong feeling unwell?" The guard hesitated. No. He just wants to have a chat with you at the inn." "If he's not sick, I have patients to look after," I said flatly. I stared him down, my face expressionless. The guard choked on his words. He was clearly a hot-tempered guy, but he didn't dare yell at me. He'd seen me snap a steel wood staff with a wooden scabbard. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. He couldn't offend the young master, and he was terrified of me. "Look, Dr. Jiang," he pleaded, his voice dropping. "We're all just working for the caravan. The boss asks for a favor. You should probably give him some face, right?" I let the silence hang for a moment before letting a small, tight smile slip onto my face. "Fine. Lead the way, brother. I'll go speak with him." The man looked like he'd just been granted a death row pardon. He scrambled to open the tent flap and led me toward the inn. Internally, I was fuming. My reputation hadn't been enough to stop this. I hated that I wasn't a true powerhouse yet. If I were a high-level martial artist, I wouldn't have to play these games. Before we left the city, Manager Liu had warned me about Hong Wei. He didn't say it directly, but he implied the young master was a freak. He was obsessed with music, but that didn't stop him from being a predator. The worst part? He didn't care if a woman was beautiful or plain. As long as she had a decent figure, he was interested. The inn was a large complex, guarded by imperial soldiers. It served as a hub for clearing beasts and passing government messages. The main building was a 2-story loft, old but grand. At the stairs, 2 of the Hong family's personal guards blocked the path. The young master had rented out the entire 2nd floor. My guide handed me off and vanished. Then, the guards dropped the hammer. "Master Hong doesn't like weapons in his room. Miss Jiang, please hand over your short sword. Don't make this difficult for us." I glared at the door to the primary suite upstairs, then back at the guards. This was a classic trap. He wanted me disarmed and vulnerable. If I refused and walked away, I'd be kicked out of the caravan tomorrow. Without the caravan's protection, I'd never make it past the city checkpoints. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. "Fine." I unbuckled my sword and handed it over. As I climbed the stairs, I muttered a string of curses from my old life, slang so foul and specific that no one in this world could possibly understand it. By the time I reached the door, I had forced my face into a mask of calm. I pushed the door open. A wave of heavy, sweet perfume hit me instantly. The room was a den of excess. 2 women in transparent green silk were dancing in the center of the floor. They wore gold jewelry and tiny bells that jingled with every provocative movement. 2 other beautiful women sat to the sides, playing the pipa and guzheng. It was a scene designed to drown the senses. The door clicked shut behind me. I was in the lion's den, and the lion was waiting. In the center of the room, Hong Wei lay sideways on a massive bed. There were no servants attending to her, but the way she looked at the 2 dancers was wrong. It was predatory and glazed. She propped her head up with one hand, while the back of her other hand was covered in a dark red powder. I recognized it instantly. Wuxia powder. It was a hallucinogenic drug used by the decadent and the desperate. The scene was a chaotic mess of indulgence, but I didn't flinch. No one knew that behind the face of this 14-year-old girl lived a soul who had seen far worse in my past life. I had walked among wealthy, depraved heirs before. This was nothing new. "May I ask why Master Hong has summoned me here?" I asked. My voice was a calm lake, but my face remained cold. I didn't hide my disgust. Hong Wei looked up and saw me standing there. She seemed surprised that I wasn't trembling or panicking at the sight of her debauchery. "Can you dance?" she asked, her voice slurred but demanding. "The atmosphere is perfect. Why don't you perform for us?" I didn't waste words. I turned my back to the dancers, blocking their view of my chest. Reaching into the storage bag hidden beneath my clothes, I pulled out my 2nd short sword. It was 1.5 feet of cold, sharp steel. I turned back, gripping the hilt tight. "I don't dance," I said, my tone lethal. "But I do perform sword plays. The kind that end in lives being lost." The room went dead silent. The four musicians and dancers froze. Hong Wei's eyes nearly popped out of her head. Her mouth hung open, the drug-induced fog in her brain clearing instantly at the sight of the blade. She was terrified. How did I have a weapon? Her guards were supposed to have stripped me of everything at the door. I stood my ground, waiting. If she made a move, I was ready to paint the walls red. After a few agonizing seconds, Hong Wei finally found her voice. You? All of you. Get out, she screamed at the dancers. Put your clothes on and get out now. The women scrambled to gather their things and vanished. Hong Wei sat up straight on the bed, her face pale. She forced a shaky, pathetic smile. Miss Jiang, please, she stammered. Put the weapon down, okay? I didn't lower the sword, but I felt a small wave of relief. At least she hadn't completely lost her mind to the powder. If she had pushed me, I would have been forced to kill her. I had already played out the worst-case scenario in my head. I'd kill Hong Wei, use my black energy to take out the guards, and vanish into the mountains before the caravan's experts could react. It would mean being a fugitive, but I was prepared. My storage bag was packed with everything I needed: tents, medicine, food, and maps. I could survive in the wilderness. I could bypass the city checkpoints and reach the provincial capital on my own. So, I said, my voice like ice. Master Hong doesn't want to see a dance anymore? No, no more dancing, she said quickly. Then why am I here? I want you to give me a medical consultation, she blurted out. The answer was so unexpected I actually blinked. I kept my sword ready but studied her more closely. Now that the dancers were gone, I noticed the details. Her skin was covered in a nasty rash. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her eyelids were twitching uncontrollably. She was trying to stay still, but her fingers kept scratching at the bedsheets. She was suffering from the side effects of the wuxia powder. Whether this was a trap or not, she was definitely sick. I reversed my grip on the sword, holding it behind my back. How long have you been using that powder? I asked, my voice softening just a fraction. Hong Wei visibly relaxed when she saw the blade move behind my back. She called for her servants to bring water and towels so she could clean herself up. 3 years ago, she sighed, looking ashamed. I tried to court Miss Chui Iniwe from the Nanshui Chui family. I failed. My heart was broken, and I turned to the powder for an escape. Now, it's like a demon clinging to my back. I can't shake it. I stared at her, stunned. This was her backstory. The arrogant, lecherous young master was actually a heartbroken romantic. It didn't match the creepy way she had been looking at me the past few days, but I let it slide for now. She sat down at a small round table, her hands still trembling. I took a seat opposite her, watching the 4 beautiful maids hover nearby. What makes you think I can help you? I asked. You're from the Nanshui region, Hong Wei said. I heard a doctor there once cured Miss Chui's father of a deadly illness. Was that your grandfather, the famous Dr. Jiang? I nodded slowly. Jiang Shang, he is my grandfather. The tension in the room finally evaporated. If she knew my family, this was likely a genuine medical plea. From what I see, you haven't been using it long enough to be a lost cause, I told her bluntly. You have the rash and the mood swings, but your mind is still intact. You can still control yourself. I reached into my storage bag, not caring that I was revealing its existence again, and pulled out a small bottle. I slid it across the table. Take this. Inhale it when your mind feels cloudy. It will clear your head. I was being generous, but it was also a warning. Showing off the storage bag and mentioning the Chui family was my way of saying I wasn't just some random girl she could push around. Hong Wei grabbed the bottle and took a deep breath. Her face immediately turned a sickly shade of green. A foul, overwhelming stench hit her brain like a physical blow. She gagged, nearly vomiting on the spot, but she didn't throw up. After a moment, her eyes cleared. The frantic twitching in her hands stopped. What is that?" she gasped. "A mix of soul-condensing flour, gold-swallowing grass, and stone-iron beast dung," I said calmly. "Use it whenever you lose focus." I asked the maids for paper and ink. As I began to write a full prescription, Hong Wei watched me with a mix of gratitude and awe. I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. The night had taken a very strange turn. Hong Wei had been holding back for days. She had ordered a stash of wuxia powder in Yongnan, and by the time I arrived, her cravings were screaming. She had a sudden, twisted idea to take the drug right in front of a doctor to see exactly how far she had fallen. She didn't realize her little stunt almost forced me to reveal my storage bag and cut her down where she sat. My short sword was still resting on the table next to me, a silent reminder of how close she came to dying. I finally understood why she had been looking at me with such terrifying eyes over the past few days. She wasn't a predator. She was just an addict waiting for her fix. Once I handed over the prescription, I started explaining how to purge the toxins from her system. I talked about steaming methods and fire cupping until she looked completely dazed. One of her maids stood by, silently taking notes on every word. Cleaning the poison was the easy part. Breaking the addiction would depend entirely on her own will. Less than an hour later, Hong Wei personally opened the door to see me out. She bowed deeply in front of her guards, showing me a level of respect that bordered on reverence. I had already tucked my short sword away before stepping out. I reclaimed my primary weapon from the guards downstairs and left without looking back. Back at my tent, my mind was racing. I packed my gear in seconds and sat by the entrance, clutching my sword. I was ready to bolt into the deep forest the moment I heard a large group of men or the steady footsteps of a master approaching. I stayed awake like that until dawn. When the sun finally rose and the camp grew noisy, a guard walked up to my tent. He respectfully handed me the medical cloth I had used the night before. I finally let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The guy really did just want to check up. I was still baffled. If Hong Wei had actually wanted to kill me, she could have hidden a martial arts master in that room. Unless I had managed to take her hostage instantly, I would have been finished. She didn't do that. Still, I didn't let my guard down completely. Once the caravan started moving, I caught up to Manager Liu at the front of the line. Because of Zhang Lianqing's recommendation and my own display of strength, he treated me kindly. I asked him about the third young master's reputation. Why did I say his tastes were unusual? Manager Liu looked confused for a second, probably wondering what I had seen last night. Well, I wasn't lying. He likes women regardless of their looks, as long as they aren't fat. He loves watching them dance. He paused, giving me a strange look, likely wondering if I had been forced to perform. But here's the weird part. Aside from his 4 personal attendants, he never touches them. The only woman he seems to care about is Lady Inla from the Chui family. For everyone else, he just wants to watch them dance. It's the drug, I tell you. It does strange things to a man's head. I felt like I had been hit by a bolt of lightning. My brain had already written a whole script for this journey. I expected a wicked, overbearing rich heir who would try to crush me, forcing me to kill him and flee into the mountains. I thought I'd be fighting off waves of experts, using the terrain to survive until I reached the provincial capital. But as a wise man once said, the martial world isn't just about fighting and killing. It's about people and relationships. As long as everyone keeps up appearances, even life and death grudges can be talked out over a table. I realized I had overthought everything. Hong Wei sent the wrong signals, sure, but I was the one who nearly turned a medical visit into a bloodbath. Not that I blamed myself. I did treat her in the end, didn't I? With that thought, my anxiety vanished. Even the dusty road ahead started to look beautiful. Over the next 2 days, the caravan kept its pace. Every evening, I spent time treating Hong Wei using the supplies available. For the parts of the treatment I couldn't do myself, I let her 4 attendants handle it. Their names were Mei, Lan, Zhu, and Zhu. Simple names, but easy to remember. I recognized Mei and Lan as the 2 women who had been dressed so provocatively back in Yongnan. Seeing them around Hong Wei, it was hard to believe he didn't have any physical interest in them. But he seemed determined to prove he wasn't a total villain. He gave me a jade pendant engraved with the Hong family crest. He told me that if I ever needed anything, the Hong Merchant Guild would do its best to help. I felt the jade. It was smooth and warm, likely high-quality Guangning jade from the south. After a moment of hesitation, I tossed it into my storage bag. I didn't know how big their guild was, and I didn't really care about his status. I wasn't some noble lady who could afford their shops anyway. But a favor is a favor. Whether I ever used it was up to me. Finally, we reached my first major milestone, Nanshan County City. It was the largest city in the region, stretching over 6 miles in every direction. Standing at the south gate, the north gate looked like a tiny speck in the distance. The walls were nearly 80 feet high. Unless you were a legendary master, There was no way you were climbing over those. The streets were a chaotic sea of people and carriages. Shops lined every inch of the main road, overflowing with goods I had never seen before. Our 200-man caravan rolled through the gates toward the Hong family's local headquarters to rest. My journey didn't end here, though. My goal was the northern districts of the county. I planned to part ways with the caravan and head straight to the Kanyu Hall to register for the martial exams. That was my top priority. It was already mid-September, and time was running out. I knew the deadline for registration was the end of September, but as I turned to leave, a voice stopped me. "Miss Jiang, wait a moment." It was Hong Wei. He was walking toward me, followed closely by his 4 personal maids, Mei, Lan, Zhu, and Zhu. He looked much better than when I first met him. Gone was the disheveled addict. In his place stood a refined young noble in a white robe and a jade crown. "Are you heading to Kanyu Hall to register?" he asked. I nodded, my expression neutral. Over the last few days, my opinion of this stubborn young master had softened a bit, but we were still just doctor and patient. I'd treated him, given him the recovery plan, and that was it. I didn't plan on becoming his best friend. "Do you know the way?" he asked. That stopped me in my tracks. I had never been to Nanshan County City before. I had no idea where Kanyu Hall was. "I don't," I admitted. I was going to ask around. A government building shouldn't be hard to find. Hong Wei chuckled. "No need to ask. I took the exam there 3 years ago. I failed the written portion, unfortunately. That was also the first time I saw Miss Cui Yinghua. Looking at her was like a tiny firefly gazing up at the bright moon. I felt so ashamed of my own lack of talent." He started drifting off into a poetic trance about his crush. I had to snap him out of it. "Master Hong," I interrupted. "You mentioned you were here to take the exam again, right?" Right, he said, shaking off his daze. He gestured toward the Eastern District. "Since we have the same goal, let's walk together. I can tell you about my past failures so you don't repeat them." I followed him. If he wanted to be my guide, it saved me the trouble of getting lost. But as we walked, I started feeling awkward. The 4 maids followed right behind us like a silent, beautiful honor guard. They were stunning, slender, graceful, and dressed in silk that showed off every curve. Then there was me. I was a 14-year-old girl, thin and somewhat frail. I wasn't ugly, but I certainly didn't stand out. Walking next to Hong Wei, who looked every bit the powerful noble, I felt completely out of place. Passers-by kept staring at us. I've always preferred to keep a low profile, and this was the exact opposite. After about 15 minutes of uncomfortable silence, I couldn't help but ask, "Master Hong, I'm just curious. Those 4 sisters, how did you get them to follow you so loyally?" Hong Wei knew I wasn't much of a talker, and he probably knew I didn't think highly of him. He looked at the maids and gave a bitter smile. "Have you heard of the Skyfall disaster in Annan County?" he asked. I turned my head, my face turning serious. I listened intently. 2 years ago, a star fell from the sky," he said quietly. "Half of Annan was destroyed. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. Many died in the chaos that followed. These 4 were refugees. Their families were wiped out. My family was at the border providing relief, and we took them in." He paused, looking down at his hands. I was already addicted to those drugs back then. When the withdrawal hit, I was like a madman. But they never left me. They took care of me because I paid to bury their entire village, hundreds of people. I also brought the survivors into the Hong Merchant Guild so they'd have jobs. I stared at him. My perception of this spoiled, young master was flipped on its head again. He was a drug user and a bit eccentric, but at his core, he was a good man. I didn't doubt his story. There was no reason for him to lie to me. He gained nothing from it. I stopped walking for a second and cupped my hands in a respectful salute. What a coincidence. I'm a survivor of the Annan disaster, too. I didn't wait for his reaction. I just kept walking. Hong Wei froze for a moment. Then a warm smile spread across his face as he caught up to me. "Since we're almost there," he said, changing the subject to something practical, "let me tell you about the exam. It's split into a written test and a martial test. It happens once every 3 years. "Wait," I interrupted. "Every 3 years?" Hong Wei looked at me, bewildered. "Yes. Did you not know that?" I felt a flush of embarrassment. I had only decided to do this in early September after my grandpa passed away. I'd rushed here without even checking the schedule. I just got lucky that the exam happened to be this year. I'd have to be more thorough in the future. Tell me about the written part, I said, trying to move past the awkwardness. The Kanyu Hall exam is different from others, Hongwei explained. It's not just basic literacy. It covers the geography of the entire Great Han Empire, from south to north. You need to know astronomy, star charts, climate patterns, soil types, mineral deposits, and hydrology. He kept talking, listing off subjects that sounded exactly like the earth science and geography classes from my previous life. Back then, I was a bit of a delinquent and skipped a lot of school, but for some reason, my geography teacher had always looked out for me. It was the only subject where I actually outperformed the top students. But this wasn't Earth. This world was massive, far larger than my old home. The Great Han Empire was a superpower in the western regions, but I only knew the humid, monsoon-heavy climate of Nanshan. I knew nothing about the frozen north or the shifting geology of this continent. The more he talked, the more I realized that my prodigy status from my old life might not be enough to save me here. I felt like I had no chance of passing the written exam on my own, but I wasn't panicking. I had Lady Inue's recommendation letter in my pocket. Surely that would be enough to get me through the basic scholar rank. I just made a mental note to study the Empire's geography properly once this was over. Hongwei moved on to the warrior portion of the exam. As soon as he mentioned it, his eyes drifted to the short sword hanging at my waist. He smiled, looking thoughtful. He explained that the warrior requirement hadn't always been there. About 100 years ago, the Empire sent its northern expedition army to the borders of northern Wu. With the help of their ancestors, they opened new sea routes and struck deep into enemy territory. That was when the Kanyu Hall established the warrior system. Northern Wu? I asked, my curiosity piqued. The Empire has stood for 1,000 years. We still haven't conquered it. Hongwei nodded. He told me Northern Wu was the home of the great demon sects. The Great Han Empire had a treaty with the powers at the center of the continent to stay away from the 9 Dragon Mountains, but the emperors still dreamed of unifying the north and east. Kanyu masters were vital for that dream. They mapped the land, predicted the weather, and found resources. They were strategic assets. Naturally, they were also the first targets for enemy assassins. The death toll got so high that the hall started demanding their members know how to fight. It made sense. A Kanyu master was essentially a specialized soldier. Hongwei told me they even held the rank of a centurion. Most new recruits joined the military for better resources and faster promotions, though some chose to be free-roaming wanderers instead. We reached the front doors of the Kanyu Hall. The 3 large characters carved into the sign above were striking. Hongwei let out a heavy sigh. He told me the warrior test was impossible to predict because the standards changed every time. It's not a real military trial, I said, looking at the grand gates. Why are you so worried? I might be at the 10th stage of Qi, he said, spreading his hands helplessly, but I don't know a single martial art. I took a good look at him. His steps weren't as light as when he was high on drugs, but they weren't steady either. He could maintain his breathing technique, but it didn't feel natural like mine did. His hands were smooth. No calluses from a sword, no toughened skin from palm strikes. The 10th stage of Qi was the baseline for any young person who tried, but the gap in actual power could be massive. I had been trained in a basic breathing style from a local gym, but I relied on my grandpa's unique internal energy control to fight. Even without using the mysterious black energy, I could circulate my Qi all day long. My grandpa never told me where his techniques came from, but I knew they weren't ordinary. Looking at Hongwei, I wondered if he was actually this useless or if he was just playing a very good game of pretend. We stepped through the threshold. A young woman in a simple warrior's robe met us. She was likely a member of the hall staff. She saw we were new and started to lead us inside, but then she saw the 4 beautiful women following Hongwei. She froze in her tracks. "Sir," she stammered, looking at the group. "Are these 4 ladies also here to register for the exam?" Hongwei didn't even blink. He looked back at his maids with pride. "No, they're just my concubines." I almost lost it. I had to scratch my head and look away to hide my laughter. The girl, whose name was Sue, looked completely speechless. It took her a long moment to regain her professional smile. She told us that registration ended in 2 days, so the hall was quiet. A presiding elder was waiting in the inner hall for interviews. We could give our info today and take the tests tomorrow. She mentioned that if we had recommendation letters, we should hand them over now. Hongwei looked at me. I'll go first. You wait here, and then we can head to my family's inn for the night. How does that sound? Works for me, I said. I sat down at a nearby table while Hongwei headed inside. His concubine stayed behind, waiting by the door. Inside the inner hall, a healthy-looking old man with salt and pepper hair sat at a desk. A young scribe in a scholar's hat sat next to him, ready to take notes. Hongwei closed the door and bowed low. Hongwei, third son of the Hong family, greets his second uncle. He pulled a recommendation letter from his sleeve and slid it onto the desk. The old man glared at him and waved for the scribe to stop writing. He tossed the letter aside without even opening it. He asked Hongwei if he had finally grown up after 3 years of being arrogant. I was too full of myself back then, Hongwei admitted. I understand now. The old man nodded. His eyes sharpened as he looked at the door. He asked about the girl who had cured Hongwei's poisoning. He had heard the stories. Zhang Lianqing had reported how she decapitated 2 mountain boars with a sword controlled by silk threads. Another manager had seen her break a thug's weapon with a mere scabbard. When she took my pulse, Hongwei whispered, I felt her qi. It moved through my body like it was alive. There is no doubt about it. She is the true successor of the imperial physician Jiang. This person is worth befriending, the old man said, nodding slowly. His face remained an unreadable mask, showing no emotion at all. Then, he spoke again, his voice dropping an octave. The divine physician Jiang Shangha, the true successor of the Zongheng sect's Lily Jade technique. Good. Very good. I stood outside, unaware of the conversation shifting toward me. Inside the hall, Hongwei kept his head bowed in a show of deep respect. He had to. The man sitting behind that desk was his second uncle, one of the high-ranking elders of the Tang clan. He was a grandmaster at the peak of the 100 refinement realm, one of the strongest mortals in the entire empire. Second uncle, Hongwei asked softly, what exactly is the origin of this Zongheng sect? The old man looked up at the ceiling, his salt and pepper beard twitching. His expression turned deadly serious. Xiao Wei, you can investigate that girl's background all you want. But never, under any circumstances, try to dig into the Zongheng sect. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Hongwei's. Remember this, the earth belongs to the dynasty, but the heavens belong to the sects. The things happening in the heavens are not for us mortals to explore. I understand, Hongwei replied quickly. He had never seen his uncle look so shaken. He knew about the existence of the heavens, but he didn't realize that a man at the peak of human power would feel such intense fear and awe toward them. Anyway, the old man said, his tension vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He leaned back and squinted. Tomorrow's martial trial is being handled by the Dragon Army of Jianan Pass. I can't interfere with that. You're on your own. Hongwei's eyes widened. What? But uncle, I don't know any martial arts. He stepped forward, ready to argue, but the old man didn't give him the chance. With a wave of his hand, the elder released a burst of visible qi. The force snatched Hongwei off his feet and tossed him right out the front door. Get out, the old man grumbled as the door slammed shut. And send that girl in. Hongwei stumbled, barely catching his balance as his 4 concubines rushed over to fuss over him. He straightened his robes, looking a bit disheveled but otherwise fine. He sighed at the closed door and walked back to where I was sitting. I had been practicing my breathing exercises while I waited. When I heard him approach, I opened my eyes and looked at him curiously. He had come out fast. Too fast. Miss Jiang, Hongwei said, gesturing toward the inner hall. The elder is ready for you. I'll wait here until you're finished. I stood up, walking past him. I didn't think for a second that Hongwei had passed based on talent. He was likely a nepotism hire who had already secured his spot through family connections. Must be nice to be a rich kid, I thought. I, on the other hand, only had a recommendation letter and a prayer. I just hoped Miss Chui's name carried enough weight. I knocked gently on the door. Enter, a voice called out. I pushed the door open. The old man sat in the center, flanked by a young scribe with a pen ready. Zhang Yi, from Nanshui County, Nanshan Prefecture, greets the elder, I said, bowing low. I could feel the power radiating off him. He was the strongest person I had encountered since coming to this world. But I wasn't nervous. Compared to the demonic entities and the mysterious Taoist priest Yu, a powerful mortal didn't seem so terrifying. The old man nodded to the scribe, signaling him to stop writing. The scribe looked confused, glancing between me and the old man, probably assuming I was another relative getting a free pass. I reached into my robe and pulled out the envelope Chui Ingyue had given me. I placed it on the desk and stepped back. The old man looked at the envelope. He had planned to do his nephew a favor by letting me in, but when he saw the seals, his eyebrows shot up. There were two, the official seal of a high-ranking appraiser and Chui Ingyue's personal seal. As he read the letter, his eyes grew wider. He looked at me, then back at the paper, a smile of genuine admiration spreading across his face. Hong Wei said you were special. The old man chuckled, stroking his beard. I was worried your young age would make the written exam too difficult for you. I was going to make things easy, but I didn't expect you to be carrying a recommendation from that girl, Chui Ingyue. He carefully tucked the letter away under a paperweight. Do you have any idea how precious this letter is? I treated her father for a sudden illness, I explained honestly. She gave me this as a thank you when she heard I was taking the exams. I didn't realize it was so valuable. To me, the storage bag was the real treasure. I also suspected that everything, the bag, the letter, might have been orchestrated by Priest Yu. Let me put it this way, the old man said. An appraiser of her rank can only give one recommendation in their entire lifetime unless they get promoted. She gave her one and only chance to you. He looked at the letter thoughtfully. He knew the Zonghing sect's techniques were considered low-level by those in the heavens, so why would the Chui family bet so much on me? They weren't betting on my sect. They were betting on me as an individual. I see, I said, keeping my face calm. I'll have to thank Miss Chui properly. Does this mean I can skip the exams? It covers the written portion, the old man said firmly. But the martial trial is mandatory. I expected as much. Appraisers were basically strategic military assets. If someone tried to assassinate you, all the book learning in the world wouldn't save you. You had to be able to fight. The old man paused, looking like he was weighing his words. Elder, I asked, could you tell me what the martial trial actually involves? I stood before the old man as he delivered the news. To pass the martial trial, I had to survive 20 rounds one-on-one against an elite soldier from the Formation Dragon Legion. These weren't just any guards. They were peak-level practitioners of the Tenchi realm. The old man took a slow sip of his tea, his eyes narrowing as he watched my reaction. I didn't blink. Seeing my lack of fear, he added that these soldiers guarded Jiannan Pass. They spent their lives in the trenches, slaughtering demons from the Hengduan Mountains. Their killing intent and combat experience were 10 times greater than any local militia. Are you afraid? He asked. I have no fear, I replied. My voice was steady, cutting through the air like a blade. The old man, who I now knew was the second uncle of the Hong family, couldn't wrap his head around my confidence. To him, I was just a 14-year-old kid from a backwater town. I didn't come from a famous martial lineage. My teacher, Jiang Shangha, hadn't even been a second-rate expert in his prime. The 100-herb qi technique I practiced was considered a mere supportive skill for healing, not a combat art. In his eyes, I lacked the technique, the pedigree, and the experience to face a hardened killer. What the old man didn't know was the sheer horror of the black energy swirling inside me. In the Tenchi realm, a martial artist's internal energy is trapped. It flows through the meridians to strengthen the body, but it cannot be projected outward. You can't form energy shields, and you can't coat your weapon in qi. This meant that at this level, no one could truly defend against a blade to the vitals, and no one could naturally break through heavy armor with raw energy. I was the exception. Between the 100-herb technique, my red mulberry silk, and that mysterious black energy, I occupied a league of my own. The silk allowed me to project my energy just enough to strike from 10 paces away. Within that range, my sword was faster and more precise than anything these soldiers had ever seen. Even the thick, copper-like hide of a mountain boar, stronger than a soldier's iron plate, was like paper against my black energy. In the Tenchi realm, experience and technique meant nothing in the face of absolute, overwhelming power. Still, I realized I had sounded too arrogant. I tried to maintain the persona of a humble youth, but my inner pride was hard to suppress. It was like tofu. No matter how you processed it, a knife would still slide right through. I misspoke, I added, seeing the old man's frown. But I firmly believe I will not fall within 20 rounds. Confidence is good, the old man said, waving it off. Tomorrow morning, head to the drill grounds outside the east gate. He seemed worried, though not about me specifically. He was worried the Legion wouldn't go easy on the recruits. He and another elder had been trying to convince the military to soften the trial, fearing the academy wouldn't meet its quota. But part of him seemed to hope someone would finally show those arrogant soldiers a lesson. He dismissed me shortly after, telling me to get some rest. As I walked out, I felt his gaze lingering on my back. I thought about checking out the local pharmacies, but the trial was more important. I needed to be at my best. I headed to an inn owned by the Hong family with Hong Wei. He kept insisting that as the third young master, he could let me stay for free, but I refused. I didn't like owing people favors I hadn't earned. The next morning, a biting autumn wind swept across the drill grounds. The air was thick with a heavy, suffocating killing intent that silenced the crowd of applicants. In the center stood a square platform made of cold green stone. Nearby, 100 soldiers in crimson and black iron armor stood in perfect, terrifying formation. They didn't need to speak. The aura of men who killed demons for a living was enough to make the average person choke. On the stage, a burly soldier had stripped off his armor, wearing only his inner tunic. He held a blunt training saber and was toyed with a sweating, terrified youth armed with a spear. 8 moves, and you're already finished, the soldier mocked, his voice booming. Are all you aspiring appraisers this pathetic? With a flick of his wrist, he sent the youth flying off the stage with a deceptive strike. The poor kid didn't even know what hit him. I looked up at the high observation deck. 5 seats were set out, and 4 were occupied by powerful experts. On the left sat the old man from yesterday. Next to him was a middle-aged man with a goatee, also wearing the robes of a Kanyu Hall elder. The center seat was empty, likely reserved for the governor. To the right sat a commander in black iron armor and a young man, barely 20, wearing intricate gold-patterned armor. Captain Sheen, the goateed elder snapped, his face tight with frustration. The trials have been going for 2 days, and you haven't let a single one of our applicants pass. Isn't this a bit much? The young man in the gold armor didn't even look at him. His voice was cold and bored. Elder Zhang, more than 50 people passed in the first 3 days. If these remaining talents truly wanted to serve the Empire, they wouldn't have waited until the last 2 days to show their faces. The Empire has no use for cowards. That's unfair, Elder Zhang argued, his hands trembling with rage. Nanshan County is remote. The mountain roads are treacherous. People need time to travel. You can't just... He was cut off by the cold reality of the arena. It didn't matter how far I had traveled or what my excuses were. In this world, the only thing that mattered was if I could survive the next 20 moves. Elder Zhang still wanted to argue, hoping to persuade the arrogant young man sitting in the center. But Captain Sheen, this proud centurion who looked down on everyone, didn't want to hear it. Before the elder could finish his sentence, Sheen raised a hand to cut him off. If they truly had urgent business, they can come back in 3 years, Sheen said. His voice was casual, as if he were deciding the fate of ants. The Great Hong Empire's doors are always open. If they are sincere about joining, they won't mind waiting another 3 years. Let's end this farce early and give the remaining time to Commander Gao. He spoke with total indifference, flipping away people's futures like dust. He had the right to be arrogant. At only 20 years old, he had already reached the 100 refinements realm. He was a top-tier genius in Nanshan County, one of the youngest centurions in the Legion, and the leader of this entire assessment team. Elder Zhang opened his mouth to protest again, but Old Master Hong pulled him back. The old man's face was grim, but he was far more composed than Zhang. Forget it, Old Zhang, Master Hong said softly. Who knows? There might be a surprise later. I didn't have the energy to care about the power struggles on the high deck. Even though Hong Wei and I had arrived at different times, we nodded to each other when we met in the crowd. We stood together, silently watching the assessments unfold. After watching a dozen more people go up, both of our expressions turned dark. We saw exactly what was happening. These elite soldiers from the Dragon Array Legion weren't just being strict. They were intentionally humiliating the applicants. Every single person was mocked and then beaten off the stage within 8 to 12 moves. Hardly anyone made it to 15. Recalling what Old Master Hong told me yesterday, I realized the Legion was trying to assert dominance over Kanyu Hall. If that was the case, I was probably going to be targeted too. But I had to get into Kanyu Hall. There was no other way. If I was forced to use my full strength and ended up killing someone, well, the rules didn't say killing was forbidden. Hong Wei, the examiner shouted. I turned to my friend. The gloom on Hong Wei's face vanished, replaced by a confident grin. I was born with divine strength, he whispered to me. I'm going to give these guys a lesson they won't forget. He strode up the stone steps and onto the arena. As soon as he reached the stage, he reached into his storage bag without any hesitation. He pulled out a pair of heavy, metallic gauntlets and wrist guards, carefully strapping them on. He was clearly planning for close-quarters combat. The crowd was confused. In the Stone Awakening realm, everyone knew that a longer weapon gave you the advantage. Hong Wei's cultivation was significantly lower than these soldiers, who were almost all at the peak of their realm. Choosing to fight hand-to-hand against a longer blade seemed suicidal. Just as Hong Wei finished tightening his gear, a middle-aged veteran stepped onto the stage. He carried a heavy steel saber and wore no armor. His face held the same look of contempt as the others. He looked at Hong Wei like he was a joke. So, you're the third young master of the Hong family? The soldier sneered. He rested the back of his blade on his shoulder, his tone mocking. Blades have no eyes. If I hurt you, young master, I hope you'll forgive me. Begin, Hong Wei replied. He didn't want to waste words with this arrogant prick. Usually, no one dared to speak to the Hong family's third son like that. He dropped into a basic, almost amateurish boxing stance. He looked like a beginner who had just started learning how to throw a punch. The soldier didn't care. With his centurion watching, he wasn't going to pass up a chance to beat down a rich brat. He charged forward, hiding his steel saber behind his body with his left hand extended. It was a common trick to hide the timing of the strike, meant to overwhelm inexperienced fighters. Hong Wei didn't panic. He crouched low and moved rapidly toward the soldier's left side, cutting off the angle for a swing. The veteran frowned, forced to adjust his footing. When they were 3 paces apart, the soldier finally lunged, swinging his saber at Hong Wei's neck. Because the angle was tight, the strike was slightly delayed. Hong Wei blocked the blade perfectly with his left wrist guard. The metal clanged loudly. Before the soldier could react, Hong Wei lunged inside his guard, throwing a right hook straight at the man's face. The veteran pulled his left hand back, surging his internal energy to deflect the punch. But he underestimated the power. Hong Wei's fist hit like a falling boulder. The impact sent the soldier stumbling back 7 or 8 steps. Hong Wei was also pushed back the same distance, shaking his left hand in pain. The crowd gasped. I couldn't help but laugh from the sidelines. Hong Wei, you liar. You told me you didn't know martial arts. I shouted. How is this possible? The soldier barked, his eyes wide. He was at the peak of the Stone Awakening realm and a veteran of countless battles against demons. He should have crushed a pampered noble in seconds. Haha, I told you, I was born strong. Hong Wei grinned. He dropped back into his stance and actually initiated the next attack. The soldier's face went pale with rage. He gripped his saber with both hands, putting all his strength into his speed. He wasn't going to let this kid turn this into a test of raw power again. But Hong Wei started playing dirty. He stopped dodging entirely. He used his body to tank the saber strikes. The blade tore through his white outer robes, revealing a vest of shimmering gold silk soft armor underneath. While the soldier stared in shock, Hong Wei landed another heavy punch squarely on the man's chest. The veteran looked like he wanted to cry. This rich brat was cheating. Even a sharpened blade would struggle to pierce that armor, let alone a practiced saber. And the kid really did have monstrous strength. His punches felt like a beast king's paw. With no armor of his own, the soldier couldn't take the hits. Hong Wei bullied him through the rest of the match. By the time they hit 20 moves, the veteran had no choice but to retreat, looking utterly defeated. Hong Wei became the first person that day to pass the martial assessment. Divine strength. Old Master Hong, your family has produced a fine talent, Commander Gao said. his eyes brightening as he offered his congratulations. "The commander is too kind," Master Hong replied, bowing his head. A smile finally broke through his stern expression. "Unfortunately, my son's talent is limited. He's 20 and hasn't even touched the threshold of the Qi Sea. The 100 refinements realm is likely beyond him. I heard the third young master was addicted to worldly pleasures and ruined his future," Captain Qin chimed in. His voice was cold, unaffected by his subordinate's loss. "He seems more stable than the rumors suggest." I knew old Master Hong had arranged for his nephew to participate in today's assessment. Seeing the old man's calm expression, it was clear he had expected Hong Wei to win all along. "Thank you for your concern, Captain Qin," Master Hong said, his voice steady. "Weier's condition is being treated. Within a month, the toxins should be cleared from his system." Master Hong didn't like Qin Tianyang's arrogant attitude, but since his nephew had already passed, there was no need for a confrontation. Instead, his eyes drifted toward me. I could tell he was curious to see what kind of surprise I would bring to the stage. Qin Tianyang remained indifferent, leaning back and watching the arena with a cold, detached gaze. Finally, it was my turn. I stepped onto the stage, my light green robes fluttering in the chilly autumn wind. I gripped a pair of short swords, each about 1.5 feet long. The thin silk threads from my wrist guards were already securely tied to the hilts. As the autumn sun beat down, the shadow of my brow obscured my eyes, making my gaze look deep and unreadable. My opponent was a soldier in his 20s. He didn't wear armor, but he carried a heavy military staff, holding it with the grip of a spearman. Although he was younger than the man Hong Wei had fought, his cultivation was just as high. He had the aura of a veteran, someone with enough experience to crush any ordinary candidate. The soldier looked at his heavy staff, then at me. I was 14, thin, and holding nothing but 2 short blades. He let out a mocking laugh. "Little girl, that tiny body of yours won't handle many hits from my staff," he sneered. "Don't blame me if I hit you so hard you can't have kids later, huh?" He glanced at my lack of armor and shook his head. "Not even wearing a vest? When you're missing an arm or a leg in a minute, don't go crying like a pathetic woman." I didn't flinch. I just gave him a cold smile. "I just hope you aren't the one crying for your mother when this is over." The soldier's face turned red with rage. To him, we were all just useless trash who had never seen a real battlefield. To be talked back to by a young girl was an insult he couldn't stomach. He gripped his staff so hard his knuckles popped. In an instant, he moved. He shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. He intended to use the reach of his long weapon and his superior momentum to force me to my knees. I stayed calm. When he got within 10 paces, I turned my body sideways. I pointed my left sword directly at him and hid my right sword behind my back, using my torso to shield it from his view. When he closed the gap to 4 paces, he lunged. The staff whistled through the air, aimed straight for my chest. Suddenly, the soldier felt a chill at the top of his skull. His battle instincts screamed at him. He yanked his momentum back, tilting his head sharply to the right and twisting his body. A sharp blade hissed past where his head had been a split second ago. I had thrown my sword from above, and it streaked down past his arm, stabbing into the ground. But the moment he dodged and lost his balance, I lunged forward. My left sword drove straight for his throat. Panicked, the soldier pulled his staff back to parry the strike, stumbling a step backward. He tried to glance out of the corner of his eye to see what had happened to the sword that flew over his head, but it was gone. His heart sank. A sharp, metallic whistle cut through the air near his right ear. The sword was spinning at a bizarre angle, curving back toward his head like a boomerang. He let out a strangled cry and jerked his head back with everything he had. The blade missed his throat but sliced a deep gash across his right cheek, about the length of a finger. The soldier scrambled back, completely dazed. He couldn't understand what was happening. How was he injured? How was the sword moving like that? The spinning blade traced a beautiful arc through the air. I reached out my right hand and caught the hilt perfectly. With a casual flick of my wrist, I shook the blood off the steel. I stood there, returning to my original stance as if nothing had happened. "I told you," I said softly. "Don't cry like a woman when you start losing limbs." The wind brushed past me. Under the sunlight, the shadows over my eyes grew darker, making my expression impossible to read. Up on the high platform, Commander Gao leaned forward, his excitement even greater than when he had seen Hong Wei's strength. The returning sword? The 100 River control technique? Isn't that the secret skill of Jiang Yui, the one who retired to Nanshui County? It is the 100 Flowers sword control from the Zhongheng Gate, Master Hong explained, glancing at the silent Qin Tianyang. Our Imperial Armory has records of it. This girl is Jiang Yui's granddaughter. What she's learned is likely the true, secret version, which is very different from the scrolls floating around outside. Down on the stage, blood dripped from the soldier's face. He didn't even wipe it. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fury and newfound caution. He shifted his grip, holding the staff like a spear again, left hand forward, right hand back, tip pointed up. He was taking the middle gate stance, the most balanced position for a spearman. He was a veteran. He had realized how I'd hit him. I had the ability to throw my weapon and control it with precision. Usually, only masters of the 100 Refinements realm who could project their chi could do that, so he figured I was using some kind of trick. He knew he couldn't let his guard down again. He slowed his approach, keeping his stance rock solid. As he reached the 10-pace mark, he saw me level my left sword at his brow again, hiding my right hand. It was a classic defensive posture. By keeping the tip of the blade pointed at the opponent's center, a fighter could parry any incoming strike with minimal movement. But it was a rigid style, usually weak against long-reaching weapons. However, as the soldier closed within 5 paces and prepared to thrust, he saw a flash. My right sword flew out from my side, but it didn't come straight at him. It took a wide, sweeping curve, looping around to strike from his blind spot on the left. This time, he was ready. He swung his staff with a heavy roar, knocking the flying sword out of the air before it could reach him. I used the soldier's momentary hesitation to back away, putting 5 paces of breathing room between us. But she wasn't about to let me rest. Like an arrow released from a bow, she lunged forward. Her staff whistled through the air, the tip aimed straight for my chest. I expected this. I brought my short sword up, the metal clashing as I parried the blow. She had trained with the spear for years. Thrusting 3 times in a single breath was second nature to her. In her mind, there was no way I could block a second strike. She was right. My left arm was still numb from the force of her first hit. As she pulled back to thrust again, I knew I couldn't move my blade in time. But I didn't panic. My right sword, the one I had thrown earlier, was already looping back from the right. It sliced toward her thigh. She didn't retreat. Instead, she gritted her teeth and committed to the second thrust. A deep, long gash opened on her leg, spraying blood across the stage. The pain threw off her balance. Her second strike lost its precision, hitting my left shoulder instead of my heart. The impact sent me flying back 10 paces. I didn't fall, though. I used the momentum to roll backward and sprang to my feet in one fluid motion. My left hand pointed forward while my right caught the spinning sword as it returned to me. My breathing was heavy for a moment. Then I forced it back into a steady rhythm. The soldier didn't follow up. I touched my right shoulder. It hurt, but nothing was broken. She had lost this exchange. In her style of martial arts, power came from the ground up. With her legs sliced open, her stance was ruined. She looked at me with pure frustration, probably wondering what kind of monster I was. She had the advantage in cultivation, experience, and technique. She thought her long weapon would dominate my short blades, but my control over the flying sword made it impossible for her to get close. She knew my fighting style was draining. I had to move 3 times for every one move she made. She only had 20 moves to win or lose this trial. If she played it safe, she figured she could outlast me. But then she noticed something that chilled her. My breathing wasn't ragged at all. I had calculated the stamina cost perfectly. I was playing it safe because I lacked real combat experience. My plan was to defend and use my range to chip away at her. But I had underestimated the gap between a seasoned soldier and a novice like me. That last strike nearly shattered my guard. If I hadn't used the flying sword to disrupt her balance, I would have been finished. I thought about using the black chi hidden within me, but I decided against it. It was too powerful, too noticeable. With masters of the 100 Refinements realm watching from the stands, revealing a dark, mysterious power would be suicide. Blood soaked the soldier's right leg, but her gaze never wavered. Her commander had made it clear, failure wasn't an option. One of her comrades had already lost, and she wouldn't let her unit's reputation be dragged through the mud. She lunged again. We traded blows. 16 moves. 17. My brow furrowed. Her spirit wasn't fading. It was growing stronger, more desperate. She swung her staff in a wide arc that nearly crushed my ribs. Something was wrong. I could feel a trap closing in. She used her good leg to spring forward, forcing me to throw my sword to intercept her. But this time, she did something insane. She let go of the staff with her right hand, reaching out and grabbing my flying blade with her bare palm. Blood sprayed. I saw half of her index finger fly off, but she didn't let go. She gripped the hilt tightly, her face twisted in a manic grin. "I've caught it," she screamed. With her left hand, she swung the heavy staff in a massive, horizontal sweep. It was a move fueled by pure desperation, a strike that seemed to burn through her remaining life force. The power was overwhelming. My left sword was knocked clean out of my hand. My defense was gone. My balance was shattered. She was wide open, her face a mask of bloody triumph. All she had to do was swing one more time at my head, and I'd be dead or broken. But she never got the chance. A third short sword suddenly sprouted from her throat, piercing straight through to her spine. Her expression froze. The madness in her eyes vanished, replaced by utter disbelief. She collapsed into the dust, dead before she hit the ground. I had a third blade hidden in my storage bag. The moment I saw her reach for my flying sword, I knew I needed a trump card. When her massive swing knocked me off balance, I released the third blade from the bag. I didn't even use my hands. I kicked the sword as it fell, using my chi to guide it straight into her open throat. If I had been a second slower, my head would have popped like a dropped watermelon. The stadium went dead silent. No one cheered. No one spoke. I stood there, waiting for my breath to return to normal, staring at the body of the soldier who had almost killed me. The only thing left on the stage was the body of the soldier, a single blade buried deep in her throat. I looked up at the high platform. Qin Tianyang, the young commander in his golden mountain pattern armor, was already on his feet. He had stood up the very second I killed her. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles popped like dry wood. He didn't say a word, but the sheer force of his internal energy was leaking out, cold and suffocating. Everyone around him could feel his silent rage. He stared down at me with eyes like ice. I stared right back. "Commander Qin, this is a martial exam," Old Man Hong said, stepping forward to break the tension. "Blades have no eyes. We all agreed beforehand that deaths happen." I could tell Hong was nervous. He was a powerful man, but even he feared this arrogant young centurion. He was terrified Qin Tianyang might snap and cut me down right there for killing his subordinate. I didn't care. I looked away from the commander as if he were nothing. I walked over to the corpse and stood over it. With a sharp tug, I pulled my short sword from her throat. I gave my wrist a flick, shaking the blood off the steel, and calmly tucked the blade away. That was the breaking point, and the dozens of soldiers lined up below the stage exploded in fury. They let out a synchronized, thunderous roar that shook the very air. Kill! 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 The sound was a physical wave of killing intent. The elder, Old Man Hong, and even the high official Gao Junwei looked shaken. They turned to look at me, expecting to see a terrified 14-year-old girl. Instead, they found me standing perfectly still. To them, this military aura was overwhelming. To me, it was a joke. I had stood before ancient, demonic entities that controlled life and death with a glance. Back then, I had been frozen in terror, saved only by Taoist Yuanming. Compared to a literal god of death, the shouting of 50 mortal men was almost funny. Unless they had 1,000 men all screaming at once, they couldn't touch my mind. But the observers didn't know that. They whispered among themselves, wondering how a girl like me could be so calm. Between my reflexes and my hidden weapons, they were starting to wonder if I was a secret disciple from some great immortal sect. "Enough, Tianyang," Gao Junwei said, his voice firm but soothing. "Accidents happen. Even your father, General Qin, killed a man by mistake during the Jiannan Pass trials years ago. Once you step onto the stage, you leave your life to fate." Qin Tianyang's trembling fists slowly relaxed. He pulled back his energy, gave a stiff bow to the official, and sat down. The soldiers followed suit, falling silent and returning to their rigid formation. I bowed toward the platform as well. I wasn't looking for a fight, and I certainly didn't want to make things harder for myself. My goal was to enter the Kanyu Hall. There was no point in making more enemies than necessary. I stepped down from the stage and blended back into the crowd of candidates. Soldiers moved in, carried away their comrade's body, and quickly washed the blood from the stone. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Every other candidate looked at me with pure, unadulterated fear. Hong Wei came up to me, looking like he'd seen a ghost. He knew I was strong, but the way I had ended that fight, with a third hidden blade no one knew I had, was terrifying. He realized that even when I seemed cornered, I was just waiting for the kill. The rest of the exam was brutal. The remaining soldiers didn't mock anyone anymore. They didn't say a word. They just fought with a cold, lethal efficiency. By noon, the trials were over. Out of everyone who showed up, only 2 passed, Hong Wei and myself. The others left in silence, knowing they'd have to wait another 3 years for a second chance. Qin Tianyang didn't stick around to congratulate us. He led his troops out of the training grounds without a word, though he made sure to burn a hole through me with one last icy glare before he disappeared. Old Man Hong and Elder Zhang led us toward the Kanyu Hall in the center of the city. You two really caused a scene today, Hong sighed, though he didn't sound angry. You'll be safe inside the hall, but Elder Zhang and I have to deal with that Qin kid's sour face tomorrow. I doubt we'll find any more recruits with him in charge of the gate. Don't blame the girl, Elder Zhang grumbled. That Qin kid was never going to make it easy for us. He thinks our Kanyu masters are useless because our intelligence on the demon tribes in the mountains is slow. He came here specifically to give us a hard time. Hong Wei looked worried. Uncle Elder, I killed his soldier. Will he try to get revenge? Yes, they both said at the same time. I blinked, scratching my head. Is it that bad? What should I do? Hong laughed, patting my shoulder. Don't worry too much. You're a disciple of the Kanyu Hall now. As long as you stay within our walls, he won't dare touch you. The only downside is the military. You've probably blacklisted yourself from ever joining the army, so your future promotions will depend entirely on your own hard work. The elders said a few words to comfort me, but honestly, I didn't care much about being blacklisted by the army. Great Hong was a powerful empire built on military might, sure, but its laws were strict. A lowly centurion wasn't going to abandon his post at the border and travel thousands of miles just to settle a personal grudge. It didn't make sense, and what I actually cared about was the knowledge held within Kanyu Hall. I needed to learn about mapping, surveying, and the geography of this world. To me, these skills were more important than raw power. If I had them, I wouldn't be trapped in a tiny corner of the world, staring at the sky and dreaming of some immortal master descending from the heavens to save me. I didn't need the army. In fact, staying away from the military meant I'd have more freedom when the time came for me to leave. We finally reached the gates of Kanyu Hall. I looked up at the heavy wooden plaque hanging above the entrance. This was it. The first step in uncovering the secrets of my own soul was right behind these doors. 3 days passed in a flash. After the martial trial ended, I was officially inducted as a disciple and given a room in a loft near the academy. There were about 60 of us who passed the final cut. I was surprised to hear that on the very last day of testing, 3 more people managed to endure Qin Tianyang's brutal soldiers. Word around the dorms was that these 3 were at the late stages of the Tenchi realm. They were strong enough to close the physical gap against the armored elites. One of them was a beautiful young woman who had fought a veteran soldier to a complete standstill. The other students couldn't stop talking about her, comparing her to some legendary figure named Shuangla. I didn't pay much attention to the gossip. Kanyu Hall operated on a 3-year cycle, but there was no seniority here. Everything was based on a credit system. If you were brilliant, you could graduate in a year. If you were mediocre, they kicked you out after 3. Because I had skipped the written entrance exams thanks to my recommendation letter, I was dangerously behind. I had to catch up on the academic side of things immediately. For weeks, I became a ghost. If I wasn't in the lecture hall, I was eating, sleeping, or buried under a pile of scrolls in the library. People started to forget I even existed. Back in my old life, I was a high school dropout who spent my days drifting aimlessly. Studying should have been torture for me. But something strange happened. Whenever I opened a book about the way of you, the study of space and mapping, The information didn't feel new. It felt like I was waking up a sleeping memory. I didn't have to memorize the words. I just knew them. It wasn't a fluke. When I read about the history of the Great Han Empire or the geography of the Ichen world, I still had to struggle and study like everyone else. But the moment the subject turned to the mechanics of space, the fog in my mind cleared instantly. I wondered if these were lingering memories from the original owner of this body. If I could find the combat techniques he used to know, maybe I could skip the struggle and become a master overnight. But dreams are just dreams. I wasn't from this world, and I was lucky enough just to have this head start. I learned that the foundations of all modern knowledge were laid down millions of years ago by the Xuanya dynasty. They were a legendary civilization that unified the world after defeating the demon tribes. Even though that empire collapsed ages ago, the 7 continents still used their systems. The way of you was fascinating. Unlike the world I came from, people here didn't just think of space as up, down, left, and right. They believed in 8 directions. Along with the standard 6, there were deep and shallow. They believed the universe was made of tiny particles called space grains. When these grains were filled with the right amount of spiritual energy at the correct depth, they transformed from a void into actual time and space. These spaces were categorized by how much Tao they contained, ranging from tiny bubble spaces to great hidden worlds. The void wasn't actually empty. It was just a different depth where time and space couldn't form. These pockets of space drifted like rivers called space veins that flowed invisibly through the world. When they collapsed, they released energy that created spiritual mountains and great rivers. The bubble spaces were what people used to create storage bags. As a mere apprentice, I couldn't detect or capture these veins yet. I needed special tools and techniques for that. My goal for the first 6 months was simpler: master the climate, the stars, and the art of drawing spiritual maps. While I was enjoying my sudden transformation into a scholar, I couldn't ignore my biggest problem. My martial arts were non-existent, and my cultivation was stuck. I had spent all my time practicing the 100 River Spirit technique, which was great for internal energy, but useless in a fist fight. During my trial against the soldier, I realized I had no real moves. I was just swinging my sword based on instinct. The library had plenty of martial arts manuals, but compared to my high-level internal technique, most of them looked like garbage you'd find at a roadside stall. Real techniques were designed for people with specific talents, like Hong Wei's natural strength. My spiritual foundation was shattered, and my dantian was damaged. Yet, perhaps because of that mysterious black energy inside me, I felt there was something the others couldn't see. I finally had the chance to study the true essence of the 100 River Spirit technique. This was the real deal. It was the dividing line between a legendary powerhouse and a common martial artist. I spent an entire day buried in the library, scouring the only 5 ancient manuals that contained secret teachings. Finally, I found one, the King Kong Demon Subduing Blade. It was the only one my body seemed capable of practicing. There was just one problem. It was a blade technique, and a defensive Buddhist one at that. I wondered if the black prayer beads Yuan Ming gave me were influencing my body. I didn't have much of a choice, though. It wasn't the movement technique I wanted, and I'd never even held a blade, but I couldn't let the opportunity pass. I applied for a copy of the manual. The Kanyu Hall officials didn't stop me. In fact, the deacon in the library recognized me immediately. He knew I was the thin, plain-looking girl who had killed that arrogant soldier on the stage. He surprised me by saying I could take the manual back to my room for a month. Wait, isn't the rule that I have to copy it here? I asked, confused. The deacon laughed and said, Miss Jiang, this technique came from the 5 Lotus Mountains. Almost nobody studies it. It's a defensive style, which is the opposite of how most people use a blade. It's been sitting on the shelf for 100 years, so just take it. I felt a bit awkward, like I thought I'd found a hidden treasure, only to realize everyone else thought it was trash. I scratched my head and hurried back to my quarters. It was late when I got back. Kanyu Hall wasn't crowded, so I had a private room in a small building. I set the manual on the table. Before diving into the blade work, I decided to try circulating my chi again. If I could just break through 1 or 2 more meridians, my future path to the 100 refinement realm would be much smoother. I spent half the night working at it, but the results were disappointing. My internal view showed the same 10 or so meridians I'd already cleared. The rest wouldn't budge. Martial arts aren't just for killing. The way the energy flows during a technique is supposed to help open these paths. I looked at the King Kong Demon Subduing Blade manual again. It was my only hope. A thought struck me. This was a Buddhist technique. I took off the prayer beads from my left wrist and held them tight. Maybe the beads would react. I tried to funnel my chi into the hand holding the beads. At first, nothing happened. Then, my eyes widened. A tiny point of light flickered inside one of the pitch-black beads. In the past, I wouldn't have known what it meant. Now I understood. No matter how I turned the bead, the light always pointed in one specific direction. I quickly cleared my desk and spread out a massive military-grade map of Nanshan County. It was so big it barely fit on the table. I used a compass to find my bearings and placed the bead on my current location. Using a pen, I drew a straight line toward the southeast, following the light. I hoped whatever this treasure was, it stayed within the county. This felt like a hidden inheritance. To find the exact spot, I needed a second line from a different location. The intersection of the two lines would be the target. The light lasted for 15 minutes before fading. To see it again, I had to pump more chi into the bead. It was a clever lock. Only someone practicing the right energy method would ever find it. The next morning, I rented a carriage and raced 60 miles out of the city. I climbed a small hill, set up my table, and repeated the process. The angle had shifted by a few degrees. I drew the second line. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay calm. Because of the map's scale, the margin for error was still huge. I needed to travel hundreds of miles for a truly accurate reading. I couldn't leave my studies yet, so I had to put the hunt on hold. It was funny, though. This triangulation method was exactly what I'd learned in school back on Earth. I wondered if some other soul from my world had brought the knowledge here long ago. Winter arrived. In Nanshan, it meant morning frost and fog rather than heavy snow. I spent the early months of the term absorbing everything I could about the continent. My memory was unnaturally sharp, almost as if I were unlocking old files in my brain rather than learning new ones. By late winter, I finally had enough free time to master the King Kong Demon Subduing Blade. The style was split into two parts, the King Kong Wing and the Demon Subduing Circle. In this world, King Kong didn't just refer to a Buddhist guardian. It represented something much more powerful. The technique included the great Yamantaka, Kalachakra, Guhyasamaja, Havajra, and Chakrasamvara forms. Maybe my manual was incomplete, or maybe my own understanding was just too shallow. I spent months training with a sword in one hand and a blade in the other. In the end, I only managed to form a blurry, indescribable energy called the King Kong Wing. Then there was the Demon Subduing Circle. This part of the style was meant to draw circles in the air to trap and gather demons. Combined, the wing and the circle were supposed to make me untouchable by evil. In this world, the saber is the king of weapons, while the sword is the gentleman. They are completely different. But this style ignored the rules. I never treated my sword like a sword. I used it like a brutal blade. That wrong approach was exactly what allowed me to touch the threshold of the secret King Kong technique. It wasn't hard to start, but mastering it was another story. I didn't understand Buddhist law, and my cultivation level was still low. Still, it was enough for now. Once my skills improved, I decided to head to the main square of Kanyu Hall. I needed someone to spar with. When I arrived, the place was packed. A massive crowd was surging toward the center of the square. Everyone looked like they were afraid of missing the show of a lifetime. I reached out and grabbed the sleeve of a passing male disciple. "What's going on?" I asked. He turned around and saw me. I was just a short, thin girl to him. The rich kid Hong Wei teased the genius Su Ling Lan. He explained, breathless. Now Su Ling Lan is about to beat the life out of him. I froze. My mind started racing, trying to imagine what happened. Then I looked at the crowd and realized the most likely answer. Hong Wei had definitely asked her to dance. The crowd was too thick to push through. I tied a thin silk thread to my short sword and threw it toward a nearby roof. Using my movement technique, I pulled myself up and leaped onto the high tiles. From there, I had the perfect view. Down in the center of the crowd stood a woman. She was breathtaking. Her long black hair fell like a silk waterfall, and her eyes sparkled like stars. Her skin was so pale and delicate, it looked like it would melt if you touched it. She had a cold, icy aura mixed with a hint of natural charm. Even in the plain, boring robes of Kanyu Hall, she looked like she belonged in a palace. I had seen Su Linglan in the lecture halls before, but we never spoke. People considered us the two strongest students in our year because of our performance in the martial tests. But while everyone worshipped her for her beauty and power, I was mostly ignored. I didn't have her looks. "Miss Su, I'm sorry," Hongwei said. He stood opposite her, looking handsome and refined now that the poison was out of his system. But he still had that arrogant, punchable face that made people angry just by looking at him. "It was a slip of the tongue," he continued. "I hope you won't take it to heart. You've asked me to dance 3 times now, young Master Hong," Su Linglan replied. Her voice was ice cold. "Do you still call that a slip of the tongue?" She didn't wait for an answer. She tucked her thumbs in and dropped into a palm fighting stance. She was clearly determined to teach him a lesson. Up on the roof, I stared in disbelief. That idiot Hong Wei really never changed. He had said the exact same thing to me when he was drugged. If I didn't know he was just a stubborn fool, I would have drawn my sword and given him a dance he'd never survive. "Fine," Hong Wei said, bowing slightly. "Then I'll have to ask for your guidance." He raised his fists. I almost laughed out loud. I suspected he was only provoking her so he'd have an excuse to fight her. I sat back, ready to watch the drama unfold. But just as I started to grin, Su Linglan looked up. Her eyes locked onto mine. Suddenly, every head in the crowd turned toward the roof. Hongwei looked up too. "Miss Jiang," Hongwei called out, waving. "What are you doing up there?" The crowd erupted. "Jiangyi? That's Jiangyi." The rumors had been flying for weeks. Everyone knew about the girl who had killed a peak 10th stage soldier and walked away. But I rarely left my room. Most people had never seen my face. Until today.